Welcome back to DemystifySci. I'm Shiloh.
I'm Anastasia.
And this is the podcast where we explore theories. Theories that you might not have heard before, and theories that might change the entire way we look at ourselves in relation to the cosmos we inhabit. And today we have a former guest on, who is George Howard. And George is an interesting sort of, what would you say, tastemaker?
Weaver.
A weaver of ideas, very similar to us in that he is deeply embedded in a number of different fringe scientific ideas. And some of those we've explored on the show before, some we haven't, but George has put us in contact with all sorts of different theorists over the years. And so he's a really interesting and unique resource as to what's going on behind the scenes with all these different investigations. So we explore everything from the Younger Dryas Impact to the boneyards to, God, where else did we go? We were all over the place. The ancient vases.
The Carolina Bays.
Yeah. We're all over the place today, looking at ancient history and trying to reinterpret the past. We're also talking about the challenges with the epistemology of how it is we come to understand what we believe. And so I think you guys are going to really love this conversation. George is also putting on his own conference this summer, which is right after our conference. So you might check that out. It's called the Cosmic Summit, and it's part of his Cosmic Tusk project. George is also part of the Comet Research Group, I believe it's called, which was the first group which came from outside the academy to publish ideas about what may be responsible for the Younger Dryas climate event. So he's a really interesting dude. I think you guys are going to love it. And check out his conference this summer. You can actually go to both our conferences, like I said. So our conference, if you don't know already, is happening June 12th through the 16th in Portugal this summer. And we're going to be exploring what happens after the Big Bang, because clearly standard cosmology is on the ropes and something is going to change. The question is what? So we're bringing together some of our favorite theorists, critics, and science communicators, YouTubers, to explore an avenue forward.
There's a bunch of different membership tiers that are available, which will allow you to come to the conference at varying degrees of care and status. So at the highest tier of membership, we pay for your room, we pay for breakfast, we pay for dinner, snacks and coffee all day long. You get to come to all the talks and discussions. And we have a tier where you get to come to a day of your choice. And so basically any budget can be accommodated. We also need a couple of volunteers. So reach out to us because we would love to see you in Portugal.
We would. If you can't make it out to Portugal, please consider supporting the podcast in some other way. There's a million ways you can do it. Obviously, you can just tell someone about it who you think would enjoy hearing some of these conversations. But most importantly, we are entirely paid for by listeners through Patreon. So if you come over to patreon.com/demystifysci, you can see about getting involved. It can literally be as little as 75 cents a week, right? And that seems like such a small amount, especially if you're getting any kind of a paycheck. 75 cents a week is almost nothing, but it really adds up to making sure we can put all of our time towards this project. So go check it out. Just see what's going on. If you do join up as a patron, then you can come hang out with us once a week face to face, and I would love to meet you there.
There's actually one other way in which you can hang out with us, which is my favorite new segment that we're doing, which is called Paradigm Drift. We collect names all month, we put them in a hat, and then we pick random people and give them 60 seconds to present their theory of nature. So if you have a way that you think that the world works and you want to share it with everybody, you should sign up for Paradigm Drift. The link is in the description, and I hope that we see you there. But for now, enjoy a conversation with George Howard of the Cosmic Tusk.
The scientific revolution starts now.
The DemystifySci podcast.
Let us see in the dark.
I would consider myself a radical panspermist as well.
Yeah.
What do you think makes you radical in that camp?
I don't just believe in the model, that life is, meteorites can transport life from Mars to Earth and it might have happened once a billion years ago. No, I believe that life is absolutely intrinsic, that it's absolutely everywhere, that because of sociological reasons, we have denied ourselves very, very clear evidence that microbial life in desiccated, hibernated forms just as we've proven with every extremophile we ever went and painted on the space station, right? They all live. Now, what the hell? Why did they evolve to live in space, first of all? They have all evolved to spend probably 99.999% of them spend 99.99% of their time not alive, but they're out there entombed in cosmic dust, right? So all when you talk about cosmic dust, that's generally cometary material, which has gotten down to its smallest fraction. And according to Dr. Wickramasinghe and Sir Fred Hoyle, his longtime collaborator, the greatest scientist of the 20th century in Great Britain, they said, that it's everywhere. And so radical panspermia, I believe, for instance, it's entombed in cosmic dust. Okay. So the problem is when you say, hey, E. coli and plankton and diatoms and whatnot are floating around in space, it does sound a little odd. I mean, how would you get a discrete piece of life out there floating around in that vacuum that we've all been taught our whole life that's a big problem? That space is some kind of just nothing squared. Well, it's not. There's a whole bunch of comet dust out there, and each one of those little pieces of dust, which is not necessarily microscopic, right? This is big stuff. If you go put a viral particle in it or a bacterium, an E. coli, it's 1,000,000 times larger. That's a great little space station, right? Or whatever you want to call it. And it doesn't even have to be alive. It's just to add water and heat.
Yeah,
Right?
dormancy is a hell of a phenomenon. I don't know that is that really a radical?
Yeah, I think
Say?
the radicalization might come in the answer to the next question, which is,
Mhm.
do you think that life originates somewhere, or is it just ever present?
Well, just personally, I think it's kind of a fool's errand, right? That's simply going to be beyond us until we get the basics down. Who cares? I mean, you can't even get. I'll give you the best example, and this is what I'm talking about on the viral video. Yeah, right. That the Russians in 2000 over a period of 6 years, I always get the exact numbers, but I know it's 10 times, took tampons. And that got all these comments. Tampons aren't sterile and all that stuff. But the fact is, they used it as a laboratory tool because it's already a made product. So they took tampons and swiped the outside of the space station, the big tourist window. There's a big circular window that I wish had been included in the video. And they did spacewalks. They took those tampons and swiped the space station. And it was absolutely a scum of diatoms, plankton, bacteria, and I think viral particles. I don't know, but yeah, it was just out there. And I'll never forget. I was picking my son up from school and just on my phone and bored, and I see this random headline. I said, "Plankton found on outside of space station." I said, "Hell yeah, Chandra has been vindicated. We're there." As predicted, I mean, he would have said, take a tampon, swipe it on the thing, you're going to find a bunch of scum with life in it, right? He's been saying that since 1970. And it happened. And then, don't get excited. Poof, just went away. And I'm like, holy shit. Then there was a little bit of follow-up clickbait that said, and you had some guy it was just awful. It just went nowhere. And then, which is a little odd for me, I was like, well, where's the paper? Hopefully there's going to come out, because it was a TASS, one of those TASS news releases. And then you call TASS and they don't let you follow up and you don't know where it came from, but somehow it got out, but it didn't have not much meat to the bone. So it turned into clickbait. Then I'd missed, Chandra turned me onto it, the paper that was subsequently published from that work that seems to have concluded about 2016. And then the paper came out in 2018. And I missed it for like 3 years. And I'm way into this stuff. And it was like early COVID I called on because I got back in touch with Chandra frequently. And we've been in touch for 15 years or so. A great digital friend, and still never see him in person. But so it went poof. Won't even memory hold. It didn't even become a memory. And they published the paper. So I was like, oh my God, well, let me read the paper. What was the real deal? And it's a well-written paper. It's obviously the methodologies were fine. You got to remember the people at the masthead on the thing have material from the space station. So there's a pretty good filter about, is this a fringe character, for God's sakes? You don't give, fringe people don't get material from the space station. So it came up 10 times 10 positive. They lay all that out, and then they equivocate, which is not surprising. They say, basically, it either came from above or it came from below. And what's the word in science? Provisionally, I think I'm characterizing it right, that it came from below. And there must be an undescribed it was some term that when I looked up, there wasn't any there. So they made up some term that says that the Barents Sea plankton was key, or was a part of the paper, that they did the DNA on it and said, okay, this stuff only comes from the Barents Sea. It would be unlikely at the Baikonur Cosmodrome or whatever that it was contaminated, right? If it was
Like from the atmosphere, or before it was launched into space? Like it was somehow drifted up into the atmosphere, or it came up.
They're saying that it wafts off the top of the foam of the waves in the Barents Sea or anywhere else. Presumably, it could happen anywhere, and then it goes 400 kilometers into the sky, into space. Okay, but think about that for a sec. Y'all are such good hosts. You're going to get this. So then it's not just boy, that'd be amazing if you agreed with the other hypothesis that it came from above, but they give a mundane hypothesis that it came from below. Well, that's not mundane. That in itself proves panspermia. That means we're spewing shit out, right? And it's probably not an isolated case. So there's no way out on that thing unless you think it was contaminated. And I trust them. And they also, I don't think it was contaminated. Okay, so here's where it gets interesting. If that isn't interesting enough, at least to some of us out here, they published another paper. The first paper was led by Mrs. T.V. Gorbenikova, and she is the discoverer of life in space. And I've tried to reach out to her, and one day, the Ukraine thing didn't help, but I would really like for her to be a part of the summit. If this is another reach out to the very last moment, she's welcome to participate. But Ms. Gorbenikova joined the second paper. And that was offered with, among other great people, Chandra Wickramasinghe. And she joined the radical panspermists and did another paper that was unequivocal and says this came from below. So she, which is really kind of strange. I mean, it's such a, that she didn't jump ship. I doubt there were hard feelings, or I don't know. But it actually wasn't just her. It was a couple of the authors. But she was the lead author of the first one, of Gorbenikova 2018. Okay, to see her then come away and say, I'm not equivocating. These are the most radical panspermists in the world, Chandra Wickramasinghe et al., and I'm putting my name in with them because clearly it came from above. So life is absolutely everywhere. It is completely intrinsic and timeless. Evolution is a codependent process between, viral DNA from above or whatever, and normal Darwinian evolution from below. And that's why you have stochastic jumps in evolution. It explains the Cambrian explosion. It tells us how the hell the octopus got here. And they wrote a wonderful paper, man, like a narrative paper, like magazine article, I guess you call it, called The Octopus from Space. And we'll have to put a link to that. All right. And that was in 2020. And it just laid it all out. It's exactly the truth. That octopus probably came in as little eggs. Probably doesn't happen often, ain't raining in today, but one way or another, that one came fully formed. It didn't have to go through a bunch of natural selection, nor could it have possibly gone through the natural selection that's suggested by the fossil record. So you sit around with these mysteries, like what caused the Younger Dryas, mystery of what caused life, and people, they won't address some pretty good answers. Just address them straight up. Let's work our way through it. But some of these things just, so you just sit around and just cuddle your mystery.
Well, octopuses are really soft, so you wouldn't really expect to see a lot of them in the fossil record, right? So I think that okay.
I always think about that one with the Silurian hypothesis. Do you know the Silurian hypothesis paper?
Yeah, Silurian hypothesis. Give it to me again.
Oh, it was just this kind of like thought experiment that a couple of folks at
Gavin
NASA.
Schmidt and Adam Frank.
Yeah,
Gavin
Gavin Schmidt.
Gavin Schmidt, Adam Frank. We've had them both on the show.
It's how does the record?
It's like if there was an advanced civilization, would not recently, but like millions of years ago, would it be evidenced at all? And they conclude that you would essentially have no evidence left of this having ever happened.
Yeah, and I think
that gets to the Anthropocene epoch, right? That now they've said we would leave enough of a record, right?
No, they're kind of like, it's unclear if we would. It would be a relatively narrow band, and if you go back 30 million years or something, a band of the size left by an advanced civilization would be really hard to detect.
Gone.
There'd be nothing left. Yeah, that's the argument. Like you might find bands of concentrated metals or something, but it'd be easy to write that off as a geological formation. The reason I brought it up was because oftentimes people will argue against it. They'll say, well, if there was an advanced civilization, even given the Silurian hypothesis, you'd see bones of the animals. And I'm always thinking about octopuses. Is it octopi or octopuses?
Just
Anyways, I always think about them because they guess they have a beaky thing, right?
Yeah, so you'd see the beaks, but you wouldn't see the rest of them.
Yeah, I think are the beaks bony though, or they're cartilaginous?
I think they're cartilaginous.
Yeah, so maybe you wouldn't even see them.
Taking any of this apart and being able to speak with great certainty is really difficult because even if, let's go to the example of life on the outside of the ISS. You have swabbed it, you have found that things are living. When you run a test where what you've done is you've taken stuff and seen what grows in a petri dish or inside of liquid, you're already making a massive filter for what's actually there on the basis of what you can grow. And I think that people don't realize how difficult it is to actually grow things. Because we have this vision where it's like, well, if you have a petri dish and you just throw stuff on it, stuff will grow. And it's like, yes, some stuff will grow. But optimizing conditions for all organisms that are there to grow is something that we don't have available to us. And so anytime that you go and you swab a surface and then you grow stuff off of that, you're already making an enormous filter for what's there. And so we're missing.
So what would that mean just potentially for this kind of experiment? It would mean what? What's the consequence of that? Does it mean it could be misinterpreted or?
Well, it means that we'd be missing a lot of stuff that's there. And so...
Can I just restate it maybe?
Yeah, of course.
I think what Nastia is saying is that say there's an organism, like this is an extreme version, but if there's an organism that lives on a type of planet that's very different from ours, that we would have no idea what conditions were necessary in order to try to germinate that organism, right? So we wouldn't use our petri dish for that organism. We would use some completely different kind of petri dish that pertains to the natural habitat of that organism. And so you're selecting for things that fit into your nice bins here on Earth. Like we'll have a petri dish that grows one type of bacteria, we'll have a petri dish that grows another, but they're all known types of bacteria that we're selecting for. So you're filtering based on what you believe these various bins of life need to grow on. But you have no way of noticing things that you don't know about already to begin with.
And then there's
Do you believe that there are undiscovered microorganisms because of that kind of flaw in thinking? Or have we at least accidentally grown or seen everything?
We've barely even begun to scratch the surface of the organisms that exist in nature.
On Earth.
Whole classes, though?
I would not be surprised because of this problem. Like, look, if you're trying to figure out a class of organisms, the process by which you have to do that is you have to figure out what they eat and how they grow in order to be able to grow them. And then you have to sequence them. And then you have to assemble their genome. And then you have to see, like, how different are they from the other organisms that we already know and love.
Yeah.
And that is,
Very few
it's
organisms.
really difficult to do because it's very, very expensive and it requires a laboratory to be dedicated to that. And so there's definitely people out there that are microbe hunters that are looking for undiscovered organisms, and they find them basically everywhere that they look.
Have you spoken about, y'all have been through this somewhat before, but I don't think I've heard you have a guest that was their main complaint or something, or have you? I guess is what I'm asking.
We've had some people that are looking for exotic organisms. Bruce Damer was doing a lot of stuff in Hot Springs. He's kind of an origin of life guy who's moved to psychedelic research. We had another lady who was studying the deep hot biosphere, but it was so long ago. I think it was like Kristen Taylor or something like that. I can't remember the name. And she's studying microbes that appear to be thousands of years old inside the crust of the Earth. So she's looking at it from the deep side of things versus the space side of things. But
I was going to try to, you can see me over here scrambling a little. I wanted to just put the paper up, but we'll put links to it. But surprisingly, something has happened to my go-to post on the Cosmic Tusk, my website. So we'll get a link to that. But
yeah, that'd be really good.
yeah, these papers, well, what I wanted to point out is they have photographs. I believe they have photographs. I can find the actual paper. But remember, there's plankton too. There's diatomaceous plankton. So that stuff is, you're not just sequencing it, you're not growing it, you're finding it. Right.
And the fact that that like becomes difficult to tell, did it come from Earth or did it come from somewhere else? Because that's almost a philosophical argument. Because if it is something that looks just like something that is on Earth, it could have either come from Earth itself, or it could have been blown in from space. And it just so happens that organisms that grow, that look, you can have organisms that look like each other, that are just somehow constrained by how atoms fit together and how molecules fit together, where you have a similar appearing organism that originates from two different places. And so if you have an ocean on Earth that produces plankton that look a certain way, and then let's say you have an ocean on Mars that has really similar conditions, it's entirely possible that it'll create organisms that look just like the Earth organisms because the conditions are similar.
I know what you're saying, and that absolutely is a possibility, but I think of it differently, that I think we are a petri dish from elsewhere, right? And I asked Chandra straight up once, I said, Chandra, what's in my head here, are you saying that out there are probably whale worlds and there are others that are kind of spider heavy? And yeah, they might have, and then there are others that, and some of them, I wouldn't say they specialize, but there's going to be this diversity, and it's not always going to look like Earth, right? Because you got different conditions. But Earth seems to make a good one. I'm not going to play that game. We're the perfect place, all that shit. But it seems like, because maybe there's a more diverse place, right? That petri dish works even better than ours, and it'd blow your mind, the diversity that you got, But all of this, is collected material from elsewhere. That differs from what you're saying in that Barents Sea plankton, it didn't evolve here. It didn't evolve in Mars. It didn't evolve on Euclideus or whatever. It evolved with, the vastness of time, right? And that, that's what you find. All these little things can be found in various combinations and various ratios all throughout. They all evolve together. There's not that much new.
What's interesting about what Anastasia is saying is that it makes an unfalsifiable prediction, right? If these NASA scientists go out to Enceladus and they find bacteria, they will always, as long as those bacteria they find have genetical identity with the bacteria on Earth, they'll always treat it as contamination. Because they'll say, well, it's genetically identical to the stuff on Earth, so it's got to be from here. That's the leap.
Yeah, that's a big problem. That's exactly what's going on. So then you do special pleading to go and get
one way or another, is my point.
That's
like
right.
You actually provided with an organism on another planet. I think that you cannot make the claim with 100% certainty about its extraterrestrial versus its terrestrial provenance if they're genetically identical, because I think the case can be made that evolution of life forms can solve problems in a relatively narrow number of ways, because we're talking about atomic interactions. We're talking about identity properties of
Well, like, look, like
molecules.
stars kind of all look this. They're all basically like most astrophysicists would agree. Stars more or less operate the same. They happen, they evolve independently all over the universe, but the same basic form occurs.
Yeah.
And
The
so the
same
same thing.
speciation of stars evolves separately because those are the conditions that are prevalent.
Right, and it's like a little different here and there, might be bigger or less, or different levels of fusion or something. I mean, we could get into the weeds forever about that, but the basic floor pan evolves time and time again without necessarily one coming from the next. It's just the conditions that the universe supplies that gives rise to that particular shape.
And this also complicates the search for life on Earth, right? Because I have this...
I get the Rupert Sheldrake?
I mean, in some ways, like the morphic resonance stuff.
Yeah.
In some ways...
Some things are meant to be.
Very platonic.
Yeah. I think that there is a limited number of solutions to any given chemical space if life has this process at its heart that it transfers, that it takes large molecules and breaks them down and harvests energy from them. Like, I think that there's a process by which life does that, and the genetics of that is the way that it encodes that information. And so if you have some really rudimentary and simple form that is appearing on Earth today, even, like, let's say that life is still emerging, because life emerges on all planets all the time.
Okay, I told you I was a radical panspermist.
I mean,
I don't think there's anything new under the sun.
Nastia's making a radical origins of life case, I think.
I mean, yeah, the finches might grow a different beak. I mean, I get all that. And obviously you see, but I think most of those contributions, it is a mix of above and below. And God knows it's beyond me what the ratio would be. And that's the big question.
I think we're on the same page about that, which is that if planets form little rudimentary pieces of life by their very nature, there's a lot of planets out there.
Yeah.
And they're all breaking apart and they're all shedding. And so if you have the condition where, let's say, that things are coming from below and ending up on the space station, then there must also be things that are ending up out beyond the space station.
Right. That's why it's an amazing discovery either way.
Exactly.
And it needs to either be refuted. I mean, just to refute it, or somebody come out and say something.
Well, I don't think that there's anything to refute.
Yeah,
I think it's
unfalsifiable,
apparent. I think that it's apparent that they are there. What is there to refute?
Well, it just depends on your starting assumptions, like so many other things in science, right? Where
but the origin, let's take the origin off take the origin off the table for a second. Isn't it still a valid discovery that X thing is in Y place? Right.
And so then you have to prosecute
where they
case.
came from.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why just finding it on the space station suggests that we're spewing. It doesn't suggest if it came from below, damn it, we're spewing light. Now, maybe it doesn't make it to Mars, but yeah.
Well, it's crazy. They found strep. Yeah. They found strep bacteria on moon rocks that they brought back.
Oh, yeah.
Right? But they were just like, no, it's contamination.
Stuff that I've got the paper up. So here are the subs. In 2013, from the porthole frame of V1 of the small research module, blah, blah, that's the location. And then bacterium species foreign substance, Delphitia sp. What does that mean in biology?
Species.
Okay. Delphitia sp DNA of mycobacteria, marine bacteria plankton. So that's one test. Then 2014, cover of the porthole, number 3, the surface module, organic matter, including peptides and flavonoids, DNA of uncultivated soil bacteria from Madagascar and reservoirs. Intriguing. Also on that same one, the surface of photoelectron converters of solar panels. Swipe that. DNA of Archaeobacteria. So that's a starter species. You'd expect to see a lot of that. Maybe that stuff's out there pretty damn common, and then it evolves perhaps. Okay, so then in 2015, they went back out and they did like 5 of them or 4 of them. The radiator. They found DNA sequences close to the genomes of uncultured fungi and radiator surface, DNA of archaeobacteria, DNA of fungi, DNA sequence close to plant genomes, DNA of erythro, blah, 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 long names of stuff. And then another in 2016, mycobacteria. But where's the plankton? I don't know. Really, if I was going to talk this stuff, I should refamiliarize myself. But, oh, that is the follow-on. Okay, guys, I don't want to get caught up in this part of talking about these things. But yeah, it's fascinating, and you're gonna. This is great warm up for Chandra to some degree, or I'm honored to precede him because you're gonna love talking to that fine gentleman. He is just an absolute treasure. Do you know he has a wonderful biography, and his parents were geniuses. His brothers and sisters were geniuses, and
That
probably
helps.
all of their yeah. And he was the best at math, the young person that was excelled at mathematics beyond anybody in Sri Lanka. And they had at the time a Commonwealth scholarship of some type. So the Queen would allow the smartest brown people in the various countries, the brown countries, to actually come to England and get a free scholarship to Cambridge or Oxford. And being one of the smartest kids in the empire, they put him on a steamship when he was 17 years old, and he left his parents, and they delivered him to Fred Hoyle at Cambridge. Yeah. And then they became one of the most fabulous collaborations in the history of science. Fred had just proved how the sun works, and he was looking for something else to do. And they seemed to have puttered around for 5 or 6 years in the late 60s. And then I could be, like any podcast. I mean, give me an asterisk. I could be wrong by a date or two. Okay. But in roughly 1972, maybe it's a little bit before that, they said, and y'all are better cosmologists than I am, but those dust clouds out there? Yeah, dust clouds. So you picture like a bunch of mica or something, or graphite kind of floating around little bits. I mean, I never know what they mean by dust. But so his brother, Dial Wickramasinghe, ran the telescope in one of the ones in Australia. And they went and took the spectra of MGC, Megalogalactic Cloud 395 or whatever. And it matched E. coli perfectly. And they said, no, 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 that's not dust, that's life. Because the odds of it matching a fairly detailed, specialized individual spectra is like somewhat like a fingerprint. I mean, they didn't have a million dots on there, but you can see their kind of crude looking graphs now, but it was top science and it was in nature. All of this
I
was
saw
in
that
nature.
paper.
Did you?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what made me, I saw that like 15 years ago, sitting around with my eyes bleeding, reading Brig Kleiss's website. He's got a great website. And I saw that graph. And I said, and actually, it's one of those things where I'd seen it a few times and I wouldn't let myself really think about it because they're talking biology and a galactic cloud. And it seems so simple. You damn test its spectra and then, well, what, and so, but then it just kind of grokked it, and I was like, oh my God,
I think it's no
I got to get in
accident
touch
too
with this
that
guy.
Hoyle et al. Were embracing
Yeah.
this eternal universe at the time, because one of the biggest arguments against this idea that we're talking about, which is the pervasive nature of life throughout the cosmos, is that there hasn't been enough time since the beginning of the universe for that to have happened more than once. In other words, the universe is so young, right? These are obviously the people that Hoyle was fighting against most of his career. These Big Bang scientists were saying that the universe is so new that life could only have evolved this one time on Earth. And actually,
That's
one
the
of the
most arrogant-
reasons, what's interesting though, is like a lot of people think cosmology doesn't matter. They're like, it's just esoteric. Who cares about the beginning of the universe? And I'm like, all of our biological theories, all of our planetary science theories, our geology, it's all constrained by this really short time period because of the Big Bang. And so I think that it's really interesting that the people who were able to imagine these really vast biological processes throughout the cosmos were also the people who weren't constrained by the idea that it all had to take place extremely quickly, like the Big Bang cosmologists.
Well, Hoyle literally went to his grave saying the Big Bang did not happen. That was his signature heresy.
I believe he came
And
up with the word Big Bang, trying to make fun of
yeah,
it.
and he came up with the word Big Bang. A little bit like Wally Broker coming up with global warming, but he would be a global warming skeptic. Or not global warming, greenhouse gas or whatever it was. We can talk Younger Dryas anytime because I don't really have anything original. Everything that I say about this stuff is not, it's a front row seat kind of thing. It's all been said before. In fact, it's been said in nature. And they
Yeah,
all
we'll get
went
him on
over.
and talk about it. It's cool. I'd love
Yeah.
to talk about the Younger Dryas.
Yeah, Younger Dryas, maybe I can contribute
Please.
something new. And we didn't get a chance to talk about it last time. We got all off on Malcolm Bendall, for God's sakes.
What's the state of the art with the Younger Dryas?
I've got a little announcement, actually.
Heck yeah,
I'll
let's
go
do
ahead
it.
and start with that. Yeah. Ask the team today. But the Comet Research Group is going to do a crowdfund effort. And I think it's going to be a really good one. We did one about 10 years ago, me and Alan West and Graham Hancock. And there's so many more tools now. And I've got this media team, and Alan's a genius and can do a lot of digital things, and run TEMs and type pottery and all this other stuff. That those two teams are going to come up with a kick-ass crowdfunding platform, because the Younger Dryas thing is so fucking suppressed and so sociologically awkward that the only way it will ever be proven is from the bottom up. And we've been lax not to, and for God's sakes, fortunately, my camera's losing it a little. Unlock me. That it already is funded from the bottom up. And fortunately, a very, very fine man in California gave us $3.5 million a few years ago. Yeah. And I couldn't believe all that came through. Watched it from beginning to end. Usually that stuff doesn't work out, man. And that's funding Chris Moore's work at the University of South Carolina. So you're constantly able to write Younger Dryas papers, because Chris, you got to have somebody full time in addition to Alan. And then the other people are co-authors, and you bring them in as necessary, and they're going to write their pieces and stuff. But so we're going to crowdfund and try to grow that and have a self-sustaining thing, because that gentleman isn't always going to be there. And who knows whether another one pops up, and you cannot let this stuff go poof. And to be frank, the original scientists are coming, they're much older. We lost Ted Bunch. Jim Kennett's in his late 80s in good health. Alan West, he's getting older. He ain't gonna be there forever. And you might not, surely, almost certainly don't know these people, but just trust me, they're all qualified specialists who went way out and said that 13,000 years ago, we find proxy evidence that there was a very, very, very bad day on planet Earth. And it led to the extinction of more than 150 species. It led to a well-accepted, poorly explained cold period that is not fringe, that won't, for 1,200 years, the temperatures in at least the northern hemisphere drop 20 degrees and everything goes extinct. And the first North American Indian culture, widespread, obvious, uncontroversial Clovis people, that they disappear. So all this stuff blinks out. If people are unfamiliar with this, called the Younger Dryas Impact Event. And in 2007, we published a paper, and that's my lane, is I'm pajama scientists that got to ride with the big guys, right? Which is a good thing, because I didn't do very well in school and I wasn't going back. And, but lifelong science geek, and I came across Carolina Bays. We can get into that, although it's a mystery and an enigma inside of a black box. But that got me into catastrophism and whether there might be a link. And then by 98, the very first guy, William Topping, sent me an email. Saw it from the very germination of, now, that said, Plato said 9,000 years before my own time, everything went to hell. This is not the first time this has been mentioned. Might also have passing references in the Bible. But William Topping said, I've got this archaeological site. I'm an archaeologist in Michigan, and I'm finding spherules and other instances and impact stuff. And the guy was absolutely stark raving crazy. Credentialed PhD, and as far as I know, a very good person, but he was out there, and truly, I think later had some paranoid things and things like that.
I just
But
wanted to add, I think Plato was only about 2,500 years ago.
no. He said 9,000 years before my own time.
I see. Okay.
And if you do the math,
my own frame of reference for the age of these things can be wildly off sometimes. So
Oh,
it's
well,
just
that
like,
always gets confusing. It certainly gets confusing to the audience. I'm glad you clarified that. But no. I mean, just think of the odds of unless it's
I
fraud or
see. So
something.
basically, like Plato in 500 BC was sitting around writing that 9,000 years before then something bad had happened.
Yeah, and he called it Atlantis, and that's a stigma we can't shake. But I mean, just take, I always say, Graham Hancock had two, overusing the word, heterodox positions. We'll drop heretical from it. Okay. And that was that there was a tremendous catastrophe 13,000 years ago. And and there was a precursor civilization. And and those two are linked in the sense that it made it go away. Okay, so that's what Graham said, and that was just stark raving bananas, right? And in the interim, that was in 95, I guess, 94, 95. In the intervening 30 years, a very well qualified forensic, laboratory based, hands on, qualified research team discovered the catastrophe. So that's a big win. And that's why Graham has always enjoyed publicizing the Comet Research Group's work and stuff, as you might imagine, because it proves him half right. He's halfway down the field now. He's got the catastrophe. And not that this is all for Graham or to prove Graham. I mean, half the scientists never heard Graham. Well, that probably hadn't read the books. So, yeah, so that's really cool that you found Plato's catastrophe. The question of whether there was a civilization gets into the Solarian hypothesis and what should be, is the evidence and suggestions that there was something that's unacknowledged before that time, is that strong enough? You're not going to find a welcome to Atlantis sign anytime soon. So that's a very difficult one to prove. But I think that's why you work on the catastrophe. Not that I'm not holding an Atlantis conference in 90 days. I am. We got an Atlantis thing. But if you look on the Cosmic Tusk, my website, I've never once got more than 1,000 posts, and not lately, I'll tell you that. But I got more than 1,000 posts, and I don't have anything about Atlantis in there. Now, the fact is, though, and that's how kind of where the Cosmic Summit came from, because I was heavily involved with that. So I heard from William Topping, and then I thought he was crazy.
Really quickly, how did
Seamus?
you get involved with the subject in the first place? Like you said that you were kind of curious and interested. How does this guy end up reaching out to you? Like, how are you well known enough to be the person that someone reaches out to when they have a theory about it? Were you
Well, it's a
already
pretty
writing
good.
Cosmic
I feel
Tusk?
like I've overtold it on podcasts, but I'll give you I can take it all the way back to 93. So I was working in the U.S. Senate. If you don't mind, this is not an answer to your question, but I just want to tell the story. Okay. And I'll get there. But I was working in the U.S. Senate and a staffer, policy, not politics, right? And worked on, the Dirksen building for 6 years for 2 U.S. senators. And for the second one, I was the environment committee guy. And we were on environment and public works, and he had the wetlands subcommittee. His name was Duncan McLaughlin Fairclough.
What a name.
And yeah, he was a one-termer, and he was a Renaissance man in many ways, not a science geek by far, but he had seen a lot. And but he was a farmer, very large farmer, had over 40,000 acres in his own county. And one day, his mind was always kind of on business. He was famous for that. One day he's like, get me a map of my farm. I was like, sure. He said, and I came to know what this was at the time. I didn't. He said, get me a 1 to 28,000 US GS topo quad of my farm. And I was like, what is that? Okay. Yeah. So I called the USGS congressional liaison. I said, the boss wants a map, a portion of Sampson County. Apparently his farm's on it. Could y'all get me one of these maps? So the next morning, as would happen with those agencies, they come over with a tube, and give me this map. I was like, hell yeah, man. I'm just producing for the boss. So I said, Senator, you want to go? You got your map. He said, give it to me. He goes over and he rolls it out on his senator desk. And I was standing behind him like you do. Like, what the hell, And I looked down on the damn thing. And if you have any experience with topoquaz, the US government has a bureaucratic approach to landmarks. And if you ain't one of them, they're going to put some generic thing on there. But if you're one of them, you get a certain symbol that means it is a wetland, it is a desert, it is a whatever, a waterfall. Okay. And there are all these ellipses, dotted line ellipses, little ones, big ones, medium, but invariably on this map, all pointing the same direction. So I was like, Senator, what the hell are all those circular things all over your farm and all over your county? He said, meteor holes. And I said, meteor holes? Telling the story a little wrong. Since I was wetlands guy for him, I had come to know of a certain wetland, but didn't know what the hell it was because you're so busy with all this stuff. But when you're reading all this environmental policy stuff, they'll name different kinds of wetlands, right? And you'll have, cypress tupelo swamps and palustrin forests and then all these types. And there's one called Carolina Bays. And here I'm working for a U.S. Senator from North Carolina, and there's a national wetland type. I'm always wondering, I figure a Carolina Bay must be something to do with like the port or, some marine thing. It never crossed my mind again, but it was weird that it was in the thing. So then he said, meteor holes. And I said, what do you mean? There's no evidence there was ever impact. And I was pretty familiar with that stuff. I said, I've never heard of such a thing. I love North Carolina and I'd know of such a thing. And he goes, oh, they call them Carolina Bays. And I was like, oh, so that's what a weird name. And what that comes from is they're most highly concentrated on the North Carolina, South Carolina line. They extend all the way to New Jersey and all the way to Alabama. And they do their same little act. They all point the same direction. Okay. They look like a blood spatter pattern to anybody that looks at it. And that's when they were first discovered in the 30s. They brought back Work Progress Administration aerial photographs of Myrtle Beach, which were some of the first. And they looked down and they said, holy shit, something slammed into the damn county. And it created in the 30s a little of kind of a furor. And people hit the damn field. And some Oklahoma geologists came in of some note. And it quickly divided into two camps, terrestrial or extraterrestrial, where it remains today. And have y'all ever heard of this phenomena, geological phenomena? Yeah. But see, the problem is, and people still, for good reason, think, because I used to be the Carolina Bay guy, that I'm convinced it was caused by the Younger Dryas event, or I was convinced. The only thing I'm convinced about personally about Carolina Bays is that they were all created at once. And that is fundamentally opposed to the mainstream view that there were four different periods, one separated by 40,000 years from another. I believe, I don't want to speak wrong, but by thousands and thousands of years. And that it had come back. There were Bay creation events, epochs of it, where whatever mix of glacial katabatic winds that they suppose would reform. But they all point the same way. If there were four different time periods, there would be some genetic class to the way they look. You'd say, well, this is group A, this is group B from 18,000 years later. That's just what I believe. I don't think it's going to take group A, realign it to those winds, nor are those winds going to come back and be from the exact same direction, start creating them again, and they happen to match the other ones. Okay, but that's all I can say, is they were created at once. The dating is an absolute nightmare, particularly if you believe in the extraterrestrial hypothesis, because that means the entire landscape would have literally been flipped upside down. So there wouldn't be any good dating if there was a catastrophe. And if there's not a catastrophe, I don't think it necessarily proves that. I mean, it's not all, of course, there's strata in it. There's definitely organic material accumulating in it, but they're not easily dated. And both sides, agree with that. So that got me on the path. Then a buddy who I talked to today was taking a class. He went back to Carolina to finish his degree, and he took a geology class. And he said, man, you keep talking about that Carolina Bay shit, whatever it is, but man, I got to write a paper, and that's like one of the topics. Could you write me out some notes? Like, yeah, I'll write you some notes. So I wrote a 27-page paper on Carolina Bays for my buddy. And he turned it in and got like a B plus. Okay. I'm like, now what the hell am I going to do with this paper? But then this is terrible, but I had purchased georgehoward.com. Okay. My own little personal Facebook in the 90s. And I was wondering what the hell to put up on it. And I'm like, damn, that's a good thing to put up there. So I put the paper up there, and Alta Vista or whatever found it, and it started getting found. And for years, I was the first hit on anything Carolina Bay was that paper, which I'm not even sure is up on the Cosmic Tusk now, which is unbelievable. But that paper, so then, okay, and here it gets good sciencey, and y'all like this kind of stuff. So then that thing's sitting there on the web for a year or two, and I hear from this topping guy, and he's talking about, yeah, Carolina Bays, I think it could be related. And I was dismissing him, and then I got another email, and it said, I'm Richard Firestone. I'm in touch with William Topping as well. I know you're in touch with you. I know he seems a little bit odd, but I think there's something to it. I've been working with him from here at my school or whatnot, at my laboratory. And I looked down at the address, and he was from 1 Cyclotron Drive, Berkeley, California. Right? I said, okay, this is a real guy. Can't be but so nutty. And then you look him up, and he wrote the big old book of isotopes with like 9 volumes and all that stuff. He's Richard Firestone. He worked at Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory for his entire career. I think it's still there. And he's getting very old. And I said, that's cool. So this guy's with them. They think it might be something of the Bays. And what he says, he said, Topping and I believed that there was a gigantic explosion above the Midwest, roughly 13,000 years ago. And we went and searched that on the internet, things related to a paleo explosion over North America or whatnot, and found your Carolina Bay paper. And we were coming at it through strata analysis, and you were coming at it by being a pajama scientist and putting a bunch of random stuff together and putting it on the internet. And I thought that was cool. I was like, wow, man, maybe there's something to it. Then they published a paper in the Mammoth Trumpet in 2001 that had some major flaws in it. And Firestone is a radiation from space geek, and he thought it was all a exploding star, and it may well be. Who knows? I mean, okay. So, but it laid out and said that you find at this 13,000 year strange things, and that's all that was needed. So then, of course, that thing, to the extent it got any attention, got trashed. And in 2005, so 3 or 4 years later, Alan West reached out to me and said, hey, I have teamed with Richard Firestone. I think they made some easily fixed errors, and I'm rebooting the subject. And I have with me Dr. Jim Kennett, the father of paleooceanography from University of California, Santa Barbara. He's in the National Academy, and he is convinced we're onto something too. And they were interested in the bays at the time. So I went around mailing shit out to UCSB, hundreds and hundreds of pounds of sand and digging and coring and all this stuff. And that went on for a couple of years. And I got to be good buddies with them. And then they published the paper in 2007 that kicked off the whole thing. Now there's 60 subsequent papers, and I got to be a co-author as a non-credentialed pajama scientist, and just stayed in touch with them. And then, like I said, it's an interesting to see it from the germination all the way through to the biggest microphone on planet Earth, mentioning it every other show, Joe Rogan. And sometimes having entire shows virtually dedicated to it when he has Graham and Randall on. And man, that just makes me happy. Because there are a lot of heretical things that you don't say. You live your whole life and it's in stage 2 of 6 or something, or, you get to stage 5 of 6 and then it dies and you die and it doesn't look like it's coming back. I mean, there are all sorts of ways to live science that people don't like. But this one, now, God knows, in 2007, I thought it was going to take 2 years. I still believed in science. Even though I'd worked in politics and just seen the worst side of human nature in DC, I still had not applied it to science. And then I've learned differently over the course of the years that they make politicians look like high-minded people of integrity. That scientists are just terrible creatures. It's only gotten worse. It's fundamentally broken, if y'all have documented as well as anybody in the country, in the world. and it's fundamentally broken. So you got to go do other things, and having people like Rogan pick up the mic and talk about it, having crowdfunding from the bottom, and having this idea woven into the network of podcasts, at least those that touch on these issues, is just a wonderful thing because it can't go anywhere. They can't suppress shit. What are they going to do? Call y'all up and tell you not to have a guest, or your show was dumb? That's not true in the comments. Fuck them.
We do get a lot of that.
Yeah. So do I.
I mean,
But you also get a lot of people that are tremendously interested, and you can't snuff out that interest.
I think it is really captivating for people. I always try to reassure those that wish to ring the bell of the death of science and how it's never been this bad, where I'm like, actually, I think that it's been like this since the earliest days that people ever tried to argue about how things worked. And you can go back through the history for the last 300 years. And
germ theory getting trashed. There are all those examples.
There's so many examples.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
But I think our science was more
just
productive, though. I think people were studying better things instead of chasing meaningless grants. Now, maybe there's so many meaningless grants that you take a few $1 billion, maybe 0.5% of it goes somewhere productive, and maybe that's bigger than it was in the 19th century. But I think it's kind of you're right. These elements that suppress it have always been here, but I think it's become really sclerotic. That money, that the government bought off science, not as a conspiracy, but that's where the money comes from, is the government. And that wasn't true 100 years ago.
Hey folks, pardon the interruption. I need to remind you one more time, this podcast is entirely funded by listeners, but it doesn't have to cost you much. You could just give 75 cents a week and become a patron over at patreon.com/DemystifySci. If you do that, then you get early access to the episodes, you get exclusive content, and most importantly, you get to hang out with us face-to-face once a week, and we would love to hear your ideas on what we should be studying and how we can make this thing better. So come over and check it out and enjoy the rest of the conversation.
We've talked about Younger Dryas a little bit. Like, we've even had this lady named Dallas Abbott, who's a professor
Dallas on. Yeah, and she's speaking at the summit.
A little bit, right? Like, I think that
she's speaking at the summit, he says.
Oh, she's speaking at the summit.
Yeah, she came last year.
Oh, that's so awesome.
And sat on a panel, but and been in light touch with her for a long time. And she's great. And that was a great episode. And that's other Holocene impacts for people that are unaware, which you'd have to be quite the geek. But like the Younger Dryas event gets all the attention as it should, because it was much, much worse than anything else. But there is plenty of suggestive evidence, including, the mysterious collapse of civilizations and all the time, from perhaps climate induced, it has that same ring to it. But there were other impacts. And,
can I ask you a really stupid general question before we get into the specifics of the bays?
Sure.
Why? I've been kind of following this topic for a while now. Like, I've probably listened to the main conversations, like let's say on Rogan or with Graham Hancock, and I see the Younger Dryas crop up all the time. Why is it so freaking controversial? Like, what is the sticking point? What is the sociological fabric or the scientific fabric upon which this is playing out? I really, Nastia's looking at me like I'm crazy.
No, not at all.
Do you understand it?
Well, I mean, yeah.
All right, I'm totally fine.
Well, do tell.
Well, no, hold on. Sorry, I was eating almonds. George, I want to hear your perspective on it first, and I want to see if the way that I see it matches.
Well, I'll just be rambling. I don't really have a ready answer, but there's a lot of. I mean, there are a lot of cross currents, and
I think people really hate Graham Hancock. I just like.
Yeah.
I think.
Well, I think they hate religion too, right? What it does is it justifies myth and to some degree religion. And again, I don't think they're consciously thinking this. I think it's actually built into the code of the mainstream.
I think they do actually consciously think they hate.
Yeah, some do. Well, and I got a good damn example of that in another Holocene impact. We went over there and found Sodom.
Oh yeah,
I think we talked about that last time. Yeah. That was incredible.
Yeah, did we? Okay, right. And of course, that did not go down well, right, with the mainstream.
So there is this long tradition of or not long, but at the advent
Yeah.
of the modern conception of geology and so forth, with these really extended time periods for the first time, you have a sense that there's a religious contingency that's arguing for this really short time period for the Earth based on catastrophism and so forth.
Right.
And that kind of sets up maybe this dichotomy for where we're at today.
You're exactly right. That the 6,000-year-old Bishop Usher stuff, they think that all of a sudden you fall into that hole if you go down there. And you know who actually has characterized it pretty well? Kyle Allen of the Brothers of the Serpent, Russ and Kyle Allen, Bandera, Texas. That I forget where he was the other day, but he called it the dam effect.
Hmm.
And it just means, man, if they take their finger out of the dike for a second, they think this is not what would happen, maybe a little bit, but that you gotta, if you believe in a Holocene impact, well, clearly you believe that giant hairy beasts roamed the woods of the Pacific Northwest. You're a Bigfoot guy. Not just like all of that's true. In other words, every crazy little thing that supposedly that's not a good one for a scientific basis, but then is on the table, and we don't have time to fight back this flood of misinformation and speculation that's going to come.
Well, maybe from an emotional level, it's just deeply uncomfortable, right? Like you might not even have to articulate the consequences to yourself. And I think we see this in other sciences as well. Like we've been steeped in cosmology and astrophysics lately. And there's a couple little things like that where, and I love this term, the dam effect, because I think that there are little fingers in the dike that need to be plugged, right? And like if it breaks, then you've got too much on your hands. And I don't think that people necessarily think
or
like rationally about it.
I think that
but
they
then
do.
we'll have to believe untrue stuff too.
I literally think that the way that people see it is that there are hordes, there are barbarians at the castle gates. The barbarians are led by one Graham Hancock, who they've never bothered to read. They've never bothered to look at the evidence about the Carolina Bays. They've never bothered to listen to people like Dallas Abbott, who's like, well, actually, there's like decent evidence, and she's very careful.
Yeah,
and
she's
measured.
at Columbia. Yeah, at the Lamont Doherty Earth Science Institute.
And so
with institutional trust at an all-time low, right? The academies are at the crosshairs of a lot of different weapons right now. Like people are pretty dissatisfied with the way the pandemic went down. It's just a
some
bad
guy
situation.
writing like pop science books he's not in the academy. He doesn't have the gilding.
Oh,
He's
they just find
writing
it
things that he it's
I
actually
think
really
it's scary. I think it's emotional.
yeah, and it's actually really interesting because I've listened to Graham for a long time, and I've watched him really come into a new degree of maturity and wisdom about the way that he talks about these things.
Oh
Like,
yeah,
I feel like he
without
was when
question.
he was
Not that he was
younger.
immature and stupid before, but
No.
he's evolved.
He's just you can see that he's much more measured and careful, and I think that the people make impressions very quickly. And I think that when Graham first came on the scene, he had collected these ideas in such a fantastic way that I think people could attack him more easily for the fact that perhaps he overstated the claims or he extrapolated beyond where certainty was perhaps.
But that's where something is definable as hard peer-reviewed science supporting one of the central bizarre contentions of his should lend him credibility if the world was a fair place. And it does lend him credibility.
Fractured according to who aligns with Graham, but like even the Comet Research Group, right? Like it's a group of people that have set aside their personal politics in order to pursue a scientific idea, and by virtue of that, they have become allied with this figurehead who has become ostracized by the very discipline that they aim to speak to, right? Like if you mention
I don't
Graham
want people
Hancock,
to misunderstand allied though. And we need to be careful there.
Okay.
Because, like, for instance, there have been situational alliances, the crowdfunding 10 years ago, and he may participate this year just because it gets good publicity. But certainly, it's very controversial within the Comet Research Group, such that it is. There have been a number of times where people have made very clear that they don't want us to have anything to do with Graham Hancock.
That's
right?
really interesting.
That these
just
are
because
just
of
as
the
true. They just listened. They got forensic proxies that there was a catastrophe. The closer we get to somebody talking about Atlantis, that's ridiculous. I'm a scientist, and I don't really want to participate in in public speculation. I don't want to be taken together as an ally of a public speculator.
We have,
Right.
over the course of hundreds of episodes, realized that academic scientists are entitled
Mhm.
to exactly one crazy idea. Like, there's actually a rule somewhere. It's unwritten.
I
And nobody
thought
has
that was my idea.
Oh, say that again.
You
Wasn't
thought he
that my
coined that
suggestion
idea?
in the last show?
Was it?
Yeah,
It
yeah, yeah.
might have been,
That if I
man.
had to make one change, he'd have to have one wild idea to be credible that
Yeah.
no one else believed.
Yeah. So you
Yeah,
can't be
no,
like
no one else.
Younger Dryas and Atlantis and
Oh, yeah,
and
that
like
phenomenon.
Sodom and Gomorrah.
Let's call it Howard's Law from now on.
Howard's Law.
Well, no,
All right.
no. Sodom and Gomorrah is fair game, though, because that's within the same discipline. Younger Dryas and Sodom and Gomorrah is all of a piece. Here's where a good example where it came up. Randall Carlson goes in the biggest microphone in the world and says, we found, limitless energy. And there's a shaman behind it and blah, blah, blah. So the whole Bendall thing comes in. The first thing that went in my head, even though later I become like supposedly one of his biggest advocates or something like that. But the first thing that came to my mind was, and I called him and I said, Randall, listen, man, nobody loves cold fusion more than I do. I've been involved in this stuff for years. It's great to know that you're interested. We've talked about it a couple of times, but dude, you can't have two crazy ideas at the same time. And I think you're right. And I agree with both, but I've never mentioned cold fusion on the Cosmic Tusk until all this happened. I didn't bring it up. It was just a totally private interest. But the reason I didn't and would hesitate is because you don't want two crazy ideas at once. It's not helpful if you have a main crazy idea. Don't muddy the waters. Pick your fight.
Yeah, like I think that people need to be reassured that the person who's presenting a crazy idea is otherwise fully together
That's
and
right.
agrees that everything else is copacetic. Because if you listen to the person that has a
Yeah.
crazy idea and you're like, that's actually a really interesting crazy idea, and they're like,
Mhm.
okay, well,
I think you just got this podcast removed from YouTube.
I can beep it. But it's
Okay,
just
yeah.
like there's just so many things that you have to maintain at all costs, the facade of respectability. And
Yeah.
when you start to talk about ideas that are outside of what is respectable, then you lose the mandate of heaven, so to speak, for your crazy idea.
Well,
That's
that's
I
right.
agree with you on that.
Returning to the dynamics of the failure to embrace the Younger Dryas Impact Hypothesis, you can't discount also the cue givers, right? And the loud people, the loud 3% that also have managed to become cue givers. And
Cue
then,
givers?
Yeah, what's that term?
yeah, they tell everybody else, they speak for everyone else. And then
No, they
everyone
cue them.
else, even if they think there's something to this, the cue is that here is, and I mean, it played out in the Younger Dryas thing. It should be it is studied. Jim Powell just wrote a fantastic book called the long paper, philosophical paper called the what demise? The premature demise of the Younger Dryas hypothesis. You know that they killed it right away, but as has been documented by Martin Sweatman, Jim Powell, National Academy guy himself, wrote 2 philosophical papers on it, that you go read their refutations carefully as a critical thinker. Forget an advocate. And I'd like to talk about that too. Everybody assumes if you talk about something, you're an advocate. And that's a big problem. So you don't even get to maintain your own scientific discipline. And, I don't believe much of anything. I ain't sure about much at all. Just get curious about certain evidence, That's why people get wrapped up in the sun comet thing. And I think that's interesting. But that's not what's going on. We need to accept there's a catastrophe, and then we'll figure out exactly what the deal was and not get fractured among ourselves. But, God, we're all over.
I have a feeling that there's 2 different types of people. One type of person sees inconsistencies in a narrative and they're really excited by the possibilities, and there's another type of person who just feels anxiety that that nobody knows for sure what happened. It just induces, and I survey my students every year, and I just ask them to raise their hands if they're Because, you know, like I'm always uncovering these inconsistencies in different pieces of our astronomy story. And I'm like, how many of you are excited about this? And how many of you are freaked out by this? And it's a pretty
I think
even
I've heard
split. It's kind of
Is it
interesting.
really?
It
And I
is,
think
yeah.
that the people who are excited just can't wrap your brain around why. I mean, it happens in UFOs too. You know, either you're one way or the other on that subject. And the other, it's not like they're they just don't want to hear about it. They're just not interested. It doesn't intrigue them, you know. And actually, I put it once on a podcast, and Beckett named the podcast or put it on the thing on the thumbnail, I guess, that I am very comfortable with ambiguity. It doesn't bother me at all. That's like Malcolm Bendall. That was a great example where everybody thinks, oh, you run around the world with him, you must believe and all this stuff. And generally, I do believe there's undiscovered energy producing physics. Do I believe Malcolm? Now, I was very comfortable with the ambiguity of what the hell's going on here. And some people don't, and you can't blame them. It's okay. And there were people in our community writ large, speakers at the summit, who were very uncomfortable with my involvement with Bendall because
Your camera just zoomed, so your face.
it's because I did my hands like that. I've got to learn to turn
It was very cinematic, though.
Sometimes cool
It
features
really made
off.
the emphasis.
Oh God.
It was amazing.
Now I'm all nervous and can't.
Now you're just a giant cosmic summit.
Oh, well, that's good. Maybe this is a good time for a little. I'm sorry,
little
guys.
plug.
Y'all.
It's all good, man.
Okay, let me get this thing.
So yeah, let's get back to the Carolina Bays. Nastia had some curiosities burbling while we were making coffee.
Hold on, we're still zoomed.
Okay, the Carolina Bays. Now remember, first of all, I'm rusty on it, and I'm an expert that doesn't know everything. But okay, with those caveats, I'm taking questions.
Perfect. Beautiful. Yeah, so I mean, the reason that I'm interested in the Carolina Bays is because we've touched briefly on the Younger Dryas hypothesis in other conversations where, okay, so there's some sort of event that appears to completely destabilize the northern hemisphere for 1200-ish years, where it's starting to get warm again after the last glaciation. Something happens, it gets cold again, and then it recovers and starts to get warm. Clearly, there's a lot of other things that happen at the same time. Like you said, the Clovis people disappear, megafauna extinctions, obvious signs of climate change. The Carolina Bays, though, we haven't talked about even once. So let's tell people, what are the Carolina Bays, how they've been tied to the Younger Dryas, and something that Shiloh mentioned when we were making coffee was, he was like, it's weird that the senator that you mentioned already knew, or...
That's because I told the story wrong.
I see.
He said meteor holes. I didn't tell it completely wrong, but I should have included that. Then I'm like, what do you mean meteor holes? He goes, oh, when I was a boy, it was the biggest thing ever. I'm like, what? He said that a comet, and he used the word. He said that a comet came crashing down, in eastern North Carolina. And I said, well, where'd you get that? Oh, it was all over the papers and stuff. And remember when I said that it created a flurry? What he was remembering, I'm almost certain, was the Harper's Bazaar had the comet that hit the Carolinas on the front by Edna Muldrow. Remember the author's name? And Edna wrote a national piece and documented that these geologists were coming in to try to get to the bottom of this crazy feature. Right. And it was presented. And at first, remember I said everyone agreed that they were from above. It took a while for the skepticism to kick in, because the original advocates of the extraterrestrial hypothesis were making a mistake that was made in Russia by Leonard Kulik at the Tunguska site. They went around digging in holes trying to find a rock. Because, in the 1930s, they were just starting to accept the Barringer crater. That the big meteorite crater outside of Flagstaff, Arizona, that's a national landmark and all that it wasn't a volcano. Your grandparents were taught it was a damn volcano. And right. So these guys come along and you've got this nascent new understanding, and they were pretty far ahead of the time. I said, oh, clearly one of those rocks hit, because they create a thing. So they were digging around in the bays as into the modern understanding of it. No one believes that they are primary impact craters. They're secondary. So what happened is the other guys came in, the terrestrialists, and poor William Prouty, the chair of the University of North Carolina Department of Geology, who died with his pen in his hand almost. His secretary had to finish the paper, that kind of thing, right? Fighting it out. And he was on the defensive by the time he died, but saying there's just no way. And I had to revise my hypothesis. We believe something hit somewhere else and caused this. Or you could go to the Zamora hypothesis. It was something that doesn't leave traditional evidence, that it had a different, but whatever, they're secondary craters. So the modern belief of the extraterrestrials, those who believe it came from above and wasn't created by wind and water, all think something goes plop one place, things go up in the air and they land on the Carolina coastal plain. If you go into the Piedmont, you don't see them anymore. That's because it's erodible clay and was all farm, whatever. It wouldn't show that. What Zamora says, well, I think it was a great contribution. Now, again, I'm not tied to this, but I think it's the state of the art of our pack of people who think something's strange with the bays. Zamora said if it hit up there, let's call it Saginaw Bay, which they all point to, if you do the Coriolis effect or whatever, that if something slammed into North America with such force, it would have created a giant earthquake. And that earthquake would have propagated in advance of the material landing again. It would have caused the liquefaction of the shallow, sandy, high water table soils that cover the East Coast, most distinctly in North Carolina and South Carolina. You'd had soil liquefaction, and then giant hypersonic icebergs from Canada come zooming in at, from low altitude jump from Michigan, and then they land, they plop in that sand. And God knows Tony has shot more marbles into sand matrices than anybody on Earth. And damn it, that doesn't look just like one.
Well, I had a really interesting experience after watching some of Zamora's videos. We went to Hawaii. And as we're walking along the beach in Hawaii, in that spot where the sand is still saturated with water and you've got water on your feet, and as you walk, you kick it forward and it makes shapes that look identical to the Carolina Bays. And then as soon as you walk higher up on the sand line where there's less water, there's less liquefaction of the sand, it goes away and they have a completely different shape. And so there's this perfect liquefaction zone where if you drop some water that's moving in the direction of your path, it'll recreate the shape. And so that was the thing that really drew me into Zamora's
there's a big morphology thing that is intuitive to people. That's why when they first rolled out those photographs, they said, well, that's a plop. That's what a kid would, something plopped into there. And that's just a certain morphology. Said something went on. And what's a plop? It means it flips over. It's going to leave a rim. It's not like a mortal injury kind of crater kind of thing where everything vaporizes. That wasn't going on. And of course, they were looking for that traditional evidence. At that time, it wasn't traditional, but they were looking for the evidence that usually does prove craters. Of course, there was none because they're not atypical craters, to be sure.
Well, it also seems plausible that if it hit 10,000 years ago, that there would have still been at least a partial ice sheet at that location.
It'd melt.
Well, what I'm saying is that, like, my first thought is, I'm like, okay, so if there's an impact that is somewhere near Michigan, you'd expect to see a crater, but there's no crater, right? There's no crater in Michigan.
Ever looked at Saginaw Bay, Michigan?
Not closely enough, I suppose. Is that the thought?
It's the thumb in the hand. Now, this is some people's speculation, particularly Zamora's, is that, and also it would have hit the ice sheet and left a non-traditional impact signature. Right? Because what happens under a mile and a half of ice, that when something comes in at 77,000 miles an hour, is not well defined. But
I think that's what Nastia was pointing to.
Exactly.
What about airburst? I think that was what Nastia was pointing to. She was like, there's probably some sort of ice still up there, which would change the footprint of everything, right? Like, you can't ignore the fact.
I still don't understand it. Like, okay, the ice that, say again.
Well, it's like, look, there's a meteorite crater outside of Flagstaff, and the thing is, it looks like something out of a Bugs Bunny cartoon. It's literally just something hit straight down, perfect crater. That
Yep.
is, or you look at the surface of the moon. I'm like, those
Oh,
are
yep.
impact craters.
They're a little shallow, but yeah.
They're a little shallow, so like I'm sure that, but we've
Flat bottomed.
yeah, they're weird. They're
Okay.
weird.
Well, let's not
But
get into the moon.
That's the shape, right?
One crazy idea.
Yeah, one crazy idea at a time, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you look at something like Saginaw Bay in Michigan, and you're like, I mean, yeah, there's lakes there, but even if you think about something like the asteroid that's supposed to have killed the dinosaurs that came down in the Yucatan Peninsula, there's like a big round deformation of the land there. So there's at least some roundness. And so if you're looking at Michigan and Saginaw Bay, it doesn't have that same satisfying platonic shape, which is why
But it would have had a barrier. It would have had a kinetic barrier.
Exactly. That's exactly.
And I
what I'm
don't think
saying.
it would create a junior kinetic crater. I think it creates something completely different. And again, I'm not saying Saginaw Bay. I'm tired of that. But these things need to be ruled in or out and what's possible. Now, for good reason, Randall puts it at Lake Nipigon, which is a strange place. And because Lake
Where's that at?
Nipigon, it's a Canadian lake, like above Lake Superior.
That one's circular, at least. Circular-ish.
Roughly. But the most interesting thing to me is you go follow Thunder Bay down below. See a whale tail coming from the north into...
Yep.
Okay. Well, you go run that whale tail back, and there's a thing called Thunder River Canyon, Thunder Blade, Black Thunder. I forget, but it's a national park or something like that. But there is a high-speed flood signature of a gash coming due south from Lake Nipigon where something was cooking. And of course, these things have been well documented all over the place, but something caused an extremely energetic outflow of water into Lake Superior. And to me, the whale tail looks like, is it unconsolidated? Is that spat out there? Is that jumbled rock that came along with it? Is that the outflow, that whale tail? Right? So maybe the ice was up there. It hits all sorts of complex dynamics that you can kind of intuitively imagine, but who really knows? And it just squirts it out like a toothpaste tube into Lake Superior. We'll have to cut that one up and put some photos with it.
Yeah, definitely. I can pull those up. I guess one question that I have is if the impact in northern Michigan or southern Canada is on land and there is some rocky soil material that gets distributed into these bays, can you find northern Michigan soil in the Carolina Bays?
Well, one, the sand is highly unusual, right? And kind of sand can be a little bit like sand. And I think Mike Davies has run that down pretty good. And they're actually, but no, it's a great question. Where would be the detritus from the underlying geology? But you got 1.5 miles of ice. How much does that mitigate and just leave behind? Maybe it creates a crater, but the stuff it's shoved down and out rather than popping up in the plume, right? It doesn't hit the bottom.
Yeah, exactly, of course.
Yeah.
And so from looking at the bays, it seems plausible that what hits there is either liquid water, like ice that's been liquefied by the heat of the impact, or ice itself.
Instantaneously.
What about airbursts? Is there an airburst?
Yeah, well, people looked at that, but why? They have a common origin. Think about the blood spatter pattern kind of feel to the whole thing. Well, something would have to come in, fragment, choose new preferential directions, and then airburst. But if it's fragmenting, because wherever it came from, you'd have to be a fairly low altitude. So it'd come in, then it would have to airburst
sort of
twice.
skim.
One, to break apart and begin the directions, and two, to make the impact. And I don't see a double airburst. See, at least that's the way I think of it. Right? Now, could you have something from space that comes in and creates that. It's just more like it seems like a low altitude phenomenon where whatever broke up was either on the ground or I don't know. I mean, that kind of had to come from the ground and lofted. But airbursts are definitely a phenomenon, for God's sakes, and they're an underappreciated one, terribly underappreciated. They would leave virtually no evidence. We have, thank God, at least, one fantastic example in 1908 in Tunguska. And by the way, Leonard Kulik, when they finally got out there 10 years later or whatever it was, said, what the hell happened here? He was fruitlessly digging around in the tundra. This gets a little weird. In neat oval bogs. There's actually a picture that looks just like a damn Carolina Bay. But see, that doesn't fit what I'm talking about because that would have been an airburst creating at certain places neat oval bogs. But yeah.
I mean, you might have a
How did I start
combination.
this? It is a mystery wrapped in an enigma, tucked in a box under 30 meters of sand or something. I mean, it's just.
It doesn't necessarily have to be
But-
an either or thing too, right? Because there might be fragments that are leading to explosions as well. I mean, I think it's hard for us to comprehend the way that our gaseous atmosphere behaves in a liquid-like fashion under compression as well, right? I mean, I'm no expert on this, but I imagine that
The shockwave?
the line between fluid dynamics and gaseous dynamics gets really blurred under those sorts of conditions.
Yeah. In little tested too.
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting about the Carolina Bay is that suggests that it is a relatively coherent phenomenon, is that when they trace the direction that the bays point in, there's like a very discrete orientation to the bays. Like they all seem to converge on something that happened near the northern peninsula.
It was a coordinated event. And that's when they separated into 3 or 4 epochs of bay creation, separated by millennia. I'm like, why would the same conditions, the clearly special conditions, why would they reemerge and not only create the same feature, but it's pointed the same damn way?
Yeah,
See,
so
I think, again, there would be classes of them. You'd say, this one's pointed a little different. And it all came back, but of course, it wasn't exactly the same direction it went.
Well, and it's just that the fact that they're almost perfect ellipses is also lends itself to the idea of some kind of impact phenomenon because I've never seen a geologic process that makes a perfect ellipse and then on top of making a perfect ellipse is surrounded by thousands of other ones that are all pointed in the same direction. I'm like,
that's right.
Parsimony demands saying that there was a radiating origin at a great distance so that everything that arrived by the time of arrival was all traveling in the same direction. And there's multiple fields, right? So there's the fields that are on the East Coast that stretch from like Jersey all the way down to the Carolinas. And then there's the smaller West field.
Yeah, and we were the first ones to look at that on LiDAR, and I'll never forget the day. We finally got LiDAR for Nebraska, and me and Alan West, and it was some horrible thing. What were those old things? Where you would transfer files back and forth. It was just so
FTP,
FTP, and your FTP and these images from the Iowa USGS data center, and but Alan knew they'd come out, so we both get in there with bated breath. We open up Nebraska, where Zanner had described Carolina Bay-like features in shallow soils in Nebraska, and we looked at it under LiDAR and said, "Holy shit, it's Carolina Bays, man!" And they're pointed the same direction, and no one had ever seen that before. But there were enough on the East Coast that you knew that you could even figure out that they're ellipses without LiDAR, but it was so poorly characterized out there. But just in case no one's ever seen one, I do have to have. That's a LiDAR of about a 12 by 20 mile area. See, that thing's 2.5 miles long there. I've actually been there. Tried to buy that actually once. And
what is this an image of?
This is a LiDAR image of Scotland County, North Carolina, or something like that, one of the southeastern counties along the South Carolina border. So there are hundreds, and I have no idea how well you can see that, but there are hundreds and hundreds of them. And they vary in size. Their scale doesn't change them. That's weird. But location does. As you get farther north, they become more deformed, right? And as you get farther south, they become deformed. That's why they're Carolina Bays, because their perfection runs for hundreds of miles in the Carolinas, or seem to, but that happens with blood spatter patterns. The fast central places, there's going to be one area where it's not perfect, but it's undeformed, and you're going to see perfect ellipses. But as you go look at the ones up in Delaware and stuff, and it's the same phenomenon, whatever created them, but those will have they're different. I don't know quite. I can't capture how to describe the geometry, but Michael Davis has classified them all. He had 5 different classes. He managed to put them into 5 classes. And only one of them is perfect, but there are thousands and thousands of those. And it's obviously on kind of the centroid of whatever in the hell happened. And why would the winds sculpt them one perfect way at this slot in the Carolinas and then them gradually? I mean, that's one powerful wind aimed because it's supposed to be katabatic winds. That means they're sweeping off the ice sheets. Well, shit, it had to come all the way from Ohio, stay concentrated, be just pumping through right where the Carolinas are now, and then less energetic, presumably, where they begun to deform as the fan spans. That doesn't make sense. It's not, the wind doesn't work that way.
So, if these bays are in the United States from this impact, and you say that there's some discovery of a similar looking feature in Tunguska, are there also other places where people have found these sorts of oriented bay structures?
Oh, hell yeah. There's some very suspicious lakes out there. Now, the problem is, nature or terrestrial nature is not beyond creating some nice circular lakes that clearly have nothing, but there's some that have some very weird properties. And those would be the remnants, perhaps of airburst, which would lend to what Shiloh was saying, that maybe it is just a direct airburst phenomenon or whatever. That, again, back to that point, airburst, it happened, I'm glad to finish that. It's happened one time in recent recorded memory. There was a tremendous explosion from above. So we know that happens. The question is, how often does it happen? Well, first, if it happened more often than we suppose, what evidence would we see? None. Until you accepted the fact it happened and said, okay, I got to go look, let's pay special attention. We're going to have some dry holes, but let's go test some weird looking lakes. Right? So, and maybe you said when it scares people, it scares scientists, it might scare the public. I've gotten so jaded on this stuff, but it would have been such a horrible, it may be true that at times we have little Younger Dryas events where you have 70 of them one day. Now, the only thing they have in common is it all happens within whatever the time period of incoming is, which with the Younger Dryas, I've heard 6 hours, and that the stream would have reached roughly for whatever instant from the moon to the surface of the earth. And we're working to get better and better depictions of that because people think the Younger Dryas event, for good reason, because it's just hard to get, was a comet hit the earth. And nobody thinks that. We think it was air bursts, which causes problems with the bays. And I'm pretty sure, I don't think the bays are related to the Younger Dryas event, just for the record.
Oh,
I think
interesting.
you want to know what my personal pet theory is? Being very comfortable with ambiguity,
That's
even
it.
ambiguity about my own proposals, is that it was a plasma discharge of some type. Because I'm a dual
The electric
catastrophist, I
universe
believe.
has made its appearance.
Yes,
Yeah.
it has.
Well, yeah. And
Okay,
that would leave, I think it would, yeah. I don't know whether that accounts for the ellipse. Would that lead to ellipses more readily? It seems like it'd have to be kinetic to like have a cone go through the earth like some more defined, which is a great insight. Right. I don't know. There's just something says, and I'm forgetting the best. Well, there are also hydrogen seeps. And this has become, I got a buddy actually who I need to get back to. There's a tremendous amount of hydrogen in the base. So put that in your pipe and smoke it. Like commercial, like people are looking at it for commercial exploitation. But not hydrogen,
Interesting.
helium.
Does that lend
Okay,
you?
that makes more sense.
Oh, what was it?
Helium.
Helium. Does that lend itself more to the plasma hypothesis for you?
I don't know, man. I get
see.
lost by that time. I'm like, how the hell? And maybe we're all wrong. Does that mean that there's something coming from beneath the ground? Because you can kind of look at them and get a sense that it's like a bloop from below. Right? So it's just such a fun subject.
But
And
you guys think that the airburst is the best explanation for what happened during the
the
Younger
Younger
Dryas?
Dryas event. Yeah. And remember, the Carolina Bays are the kooky caboose of the Younger Dryas Impact Theory, and has been they are not in any paper after the first one because
Yeah,
they're
can you
very
lay that out
controversial
for
with
us? Like, why did they get removed as being part of the
b-
Younger Dryas?
because the first paper was a little bit probably philosophically more loose and said we've got a suite of evidence here, and we don't mind saying that this is very curious, and we did find some proxies and whatnot. Now the bays could have been old and it could have contained the proxies. I won't get all into that, but it made the cut for the first paper. Let's throw out some evidence. But then when the stakes got ramped up, frankly, it gets more like a court case, and you're trying to prove a murder, and any detective's going to have a whole bunch of evidence that they can't bring to court because you only got so much time, so much concentration, and you got a goal. So the Comet Research Group, and also some of the scientists said that's ridiculous. That is absolute kook territory. I'm not going to join this next paper because we were getting bigger, with that Carolina Bay stuff in it. And in fact, Chris Moore, University, I should say this, good for the record that Chris Moore, who, leads the full-time paper writing effort for the CRG now, does not have any time for this. And he studied them very, very carefully. He got his PhD studying Carolina Bays. Okay. And he has no time for it, thinks it's complete bullshit. So does Malcolm LeCompte, who's a pretty key figure. But then there are
What do they
others.
think that they are?
Oh, katabatic winds blowing off the ice sheet, the conspiring winds and water to create. And I don't think that they're, and I'm not taking shots at them. I mean, you're talking allies here, big time. But I find that they don't sufficiently appreciate the morphology argument, that this is special morphology, and you need to explain that with your winds. And there need to be more blowing wind. And, it all came from Kakrowski's 1976 paper funded by NASA that where he took a fan and blew it onto a little stage of sand and water. And it created roughly circular features in the sand. And that was his nail in the coffin to the long simmering, one time very hot ETT debate. Then Kakrowski, for whatever reason, he broke the back of the ET people, and it was over for 20 or 30 years, and now it's kind of come back to some degree. And I'm thrilled with the attention it gets.
And so do
I
you
mean,
think that the Carolina Bays were at the same time as the Younger Dryas, or do you think that there is a different
no,
timeline?
no. My gut says, just reading about it for years, that it's an unrelated catastrophic event, frankly.
When do you think that it happened?
Well, my buddy Mike Davies says 80,000 years ago because where they appear on the terraces, the geological terraces of North Carolina's rivers, they seem to be denying their existence during certain ages, and some are dated. But then other people in the Comet Research Group that are still very interested in the Carolina Bays can take that down. And I think Davies is leaning too much on that. So that was 80,000 years ago. Okay. And I also don't think they would survive that long. I've spent a lot of time in Carolina Bays. I've restored them to wetlands, the whole 9 yards, and I just think they're somewhat delicate features and wouldn't make it through 80,000 years and still look perfect if they were created catastrophically. Now, if the processes are slow processes, I guess, I don't know. Yeah, it's a good subject though, because you ain't never going to get I guess you don't get to the bottom of many of these, but this one, you don't even get much closer. It's just a great mystery. And it's in everybody's reach. I mean, there's 90,000 people live within 50 miles of Carolina Bay. There are whole cities in New Jersey that are under them. Long Island has them. Beautiful bays on Long Island. Um, I hear kind of related thing, just ask some weird questions. Why is there no tsunami signature on the Atlantic seaboard? And people will say, well, it's just not a common place for it. No, 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 no. Well, if it's not common, has it ever happened? Well, if it happened once, there should be. We have evidence that because of the failure of the damn La Palma volcano or whatever, that something in the past should have created a wave that crashed on the East Coast at some point, and there is none, which suggests to me that there's plenty of evidence for it, and I've got some. You know what I mean? I mean, I've seen a whole bunch of things in geology in North Carolina because I live here and whatnot. That says, God, something happened, man. I mean, they're buried forests. There's a buried forest 40,000 years old. There's a good data point in South Carolina where they found, an entire forest. And this is not fossilized. I mean, these were still trees and of gigantic cypress trees, just all blown down like matchsticks, not burnt.
Hmm.
And they're all 40,000 years old, and that didn't, I mean, how the hell's that happen? Okay. And that's not necessarily a tsunami. Okay. But back to just my mind game, except East Carolina University and Steve Culver, their lab, marine geology lab at ECU, a good one, have been coring Pamlico Bay for the last 30 years. And that's the biggest inland estuary, on the East Coast, other than Chesapeake Bay. And so it's at times 40 miles wide or whatever, 35 miles wide, and it's a 6 feet deep, the whole thing. So you go and core along that. And what did Culver discover? A lot of things, but that at 1000 AD, the Outer Banks, that thin band of islands off of North Carolina, he calls it collapsed. It just went away. Everything goes marine in Pamlico Bay again. Like it opened up. And then the islands reformed. And that is as mainstream as it gets. Okay. So what does he attribute that to? I don't, he doesn't do, because it is accepted. Rocks can hit the pond. So he doesn't address that. And he says it would have been a combination of superstorms where you have unimaginable hurricane intensities, stochastic, wild thing that just happened. Right? Give me something better than that, man. Okay, yeah, maybe there's a kind of undiscovered hurricanes, but there are also rocks in the pond. Okay, here's where it gets interesting. So they put it at roughly circa 1000. All right. Well, I got to call up a post just so I don't make some easy mistakes. So it is well documented in medieval, not well documented, nothing in medieval times well documented, but it is well documented in medieval England that there was a tremendous flood. They call it the St. Michael's Day flood, right? And it went up the Severn River, and there's a wood carving of people on top of the church and other people getting swept away. I mean, a big wave came in. And when was that? 1014 AD. Right? So if you got somebody on one side of the pond, credentialed dude saying, and we tested it and something happened, right? Or the Outer Banks collapsed. And then on the other side of the pond, coincidentally, at very, roughly the same time, a giant wave came in. Maybe there was a rock in the pond that we missed. And that wouldn't, you'd say, well, we'd all know that. That's damn medieval times. And you go read medieval stuff, and they're always talking about shit like that. They were playing things coming out of the sky. They call them dragons. They're fiery mouth, got a long tail. Yeah, they do say that shit like that happened. And you just missed it. I mean, all that is a 50-meter thing that we know exists. It doesn't even have to be a comet or anything like that. Just be an iron, one of these. Like the other one does, an iron asteroid, right? Comes in, hits the Atlantic. Totally nothing woo about that. It's just that it happened much more recently. See, that's where they have demanded of impact science long time periods. And if you remove the long time period, they don't want anything to do with it. But there's no reason to believe that we would detect a lot of these things. Like, certainly
that's
the
hard
air
to argue
bursts.
with, right? That seems simply apparent that the record is poorly constructed and that lots of things have fallen through the Swiss cheese
You would
nut
start
of
with the
written history.
presumption that it was rare is your first presumption because you hadn't seen one, you hadn't heard of one.
It
But
does
if you
seem
put it
like it
on,
has to be relatively rare, though, right? Because we're not constantly being inundated.
no,
Maybe
and
there's
I don't think it's
periods,
any danger.
right?
Particular. I had a long talk the other day with some people when we're doing the crowdfunding thing. We do whatever we want. And if you want to say repent, repent, we need to know this because it could happen tomorrow. That's what I call it. There's plenty of websites out there, repent, repent. But I ain't putting the sandwich board on and talk about the future. That's why the Cosmic Tusk always looks backwards. That we will figure out the future only when we understand our past.
Interesting. Okay, so this is actually something that I've wondered about a lot. Do you feel like fascination with these sorts of world-ending impacts are tied into this idea of
Yeah.
revelation, of the end of days, of a religious fervor that thinks
Oh,
that the
hell
world
yeah.
is due to burn?
Are you saying that there's cosmic collision
No, I mean
that
in the sense of
revelations, for instance, I believe that the Bible describes, I think, the hosts in sky, all that. There's a great book called The Comets of God that this guy Jeffrey Goldman wrote, and I was going to give it out to my Bible study the other day. In fact, I need to remember to bring it in and just give it to some of the guys that are interested in this kind of stuff. And he documents, it's incredible. You're like, oh my God, I knew there might be some allusions to these things that happened that slip their way in the Bible and are retold and spiritualized and whatnot. But whoa, I mean, he goes and says a whole bunch of this stuff. A whole bunch. And I don't know how we got into that.
Oh well, the question that I
Yeah,
was
excuse
asking
me.
was more directed at the sense of the people who are alive today see evidence of comet impacts to
Mhm.
be a prediction for what is about to happen to the Earth. Do you know what I mean? Like I feel like there's a
Oh,
mythological aspect to this that can be turned into this kind of doomsday scenario that means that you have to
right.
spend your life prepping, that like the day of judgment is coming, that
Well, Graham is on that team.
revelation. Hmm?
See, that's if you think it's a recurring cycle that's responsible for these, that's when you start to get scared for our own time, which I don't do. I don't think it's any particular threat to our kids, grandkids, or whatnot. But say give it 10 generations and it might blink the world out. But that if there are cyclical interactions with the Tard meteor stream or whatever it is out there, one of the things that intrigues me is, what is the odds of the Younger Dryas event being exactly halfway the time distance to um, the Great Year? Why would those two? Why would precession and that 26,000 year cycle, if you divide it perfectly in half and it comes back every 13,000 years, then hell yeah, we're due. But maybe it's just coincidence that the age of Aquarius is dawning, that halfway through that cycle is when we find forensic evidence has nothing to do, but Hamlet's Mill, all of that suggests, God, you two have probably read Hamlet's Mill. Someone's going to be
Tried
found
to.
somewhere.
Yeah.
Did you? Okay, maybe I've heard y'all
we
talk
both
about
have
tried to.
aborted efforts at it.
Well, that
I,
we're in a big crowd there. Never heard anybody say, "Oh yes, I read it very carefully." The whole thing.
I mean, yeah, it is
But
very
the premise is
intriguing.
correct.
That I got into Graham right after that because it was a lot easier to read. This was like when I was in my early 20s. But what was I gonna say?
You were talking about the like religious revelatory Hamlet's Mill mythological encoding of
Oh yeah,
things.
if we wanted to make a statement about the great year, I think we'd need a few data points for these impacts more than just the single one.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of suggests that there's some kind of thing that's meant to be that happens. I don't know. But I mean, fair enough. But you got to get a little more woo for that. But it's a hell of a coincidence, that a lot of people are interested in the subject, are interested in the great year, kind of all goes together. And then this happens to be perfectly at the midway point, which isn't much. That ain't evidence of anything, but it's interesting.
There's a lot of questions about precession in my mind. I honestly don't have a firm theory. I hate talking about this with my astronomy students because,
Yeah.
the standard explanation with the wobble and the what do they call it? The Milankovitch cycles and
Yeah,
so forth.
Milankovitch
You
cycles.
really have to squint. It's a hard one to even explain to someone, right? How you
Right.
get it as a result of these different interacting cycles, and there's lots of internal contradictions. So
Yeah.
yeah, so building a theory on top of the great year on top of that, it's just very, very difficult. It's so many layers of abstraction and unknowns. I have a hard time coming to grips with it.
Yeah. There was another one, my tusk, actually.
What's this tusk thing mean, by the way?
Oh, this is my travel tusk. Mammoth tusk, right?
Nice.
Little stand.
I like
Yeah,
that.
how
But
did
no,
tusk?
I have a,
What is the tusk of? How did it end
yeah,
up with that in the title?
I've got this 11-foot long mammoth tusk that's been hanging above my TV in my house since 2007. And it was on a National Geographic, 2009. And it was on a National Geographic Explorer because at that time we were kind of in a honeymoon phase before the trolls came out and the cabal formed. And they were doing good TV on it. And National Geographic Explorer did a thing on the Comet Research, or on the Younger Dryas event. And the very beginnings of it with Alan, where him and Firestone were finding pieces and parts of Mammoth and Ice Age ox and all that kind of stuff that had what they identified as nickel-rich iron spherules, in them, in these tusks. And they went to film Alan first realizing that. And it's pretty simple. You take a neodymium magnet, hang it from a piece of thread, you put it up against near the tusk, and it goes ting.
Hmm.
So that's the big orchestra moment in the show, So they're recreating this at Canada Fossils in Calgary and flew up there. And I remember it was exciting because it was in HD. They're going to film HD. Okay, so they went up there and they were going to recreate it the next day. And Alan said, well, let me go find a good tusk. But then when you're into tusks and you're into the forensic part of it and you happen to be at the biggest tusk warehouse in the world, why not go look for another one? Right? I mean, he's curious. So he had his magnet and he wasn't just going to grab anyone. He went and tested tusks and one of them went ding. So the next day they used it as the prop for what was a discovery with a much less dramatic looking tusk. This one happens to be perfect in a lot of ways. And then Canada Fossils sent the team an email and said, hey, thank you for bringing the attention to our business. That was really neat. We got to be on a National Geographic Explorer. That tusk you used, we will sell to you for an incredible price. Right. And it went around to the Comet Research Group and, all these scientists and whatnot. No, nobody bid. And we were just had built onto our home and had a big blank spot, and the decorator was there, and she goes, you need something above that big TV. You need something natural, something old, given your things. I was like, I think I know the thing. Hold on. So then I'm like, oh, it'll never fit, or how big was that thing and whatnot. So I go get the pictures and asked Alan what the specs were, and I was like, holy shit, it's going to fit perfect. So I said, I'll take that damn thing. So it took like 4 months. It comes like in this Indiana Jones, shipping crate. The thing weighs 170 pounds. So you got to get 2 or 3 people to pick it up, and its bark is not removed. See, this one has been polished, right? But that one, they left the bark on because it has nickel-rich iron blotches and indentations and holes on it, which kind of begs the question. This is kind of funny because that's why it's the Cosmic Tusk. Okay. And then that's what I named my blog when I started the Cosmic Tusk, because the trolls were coming out on us. And I said, there needs to be somebody kind of publicizing the other side or picking on them, trolling back at them, whatever. So I said, what am I going to name? Well, first of all, I thought of the name and I said, I got to have a blog. That's such a good name. That's really the way it happened. I said, if I had a blog, I'd call it the Cosmic Tusk. And I said, damn, that's such a good name, man. I gotta do the blog. So that's kind of my nom de plume, right? Where the Cosmic Summit is the event, but whatever. So this thing, it's still up there. I can do the magnet trick and whatnot. So that's the tusk, and subsequently bought another one. Oh, but that tusk is 37,000 years old. They went and did the dating, which early on this was really proof to me that this was all legit, because they were already, my tusk has been in nature. It was called Bullets. Researchers find bullets embedded in mammoth tusk. and it was in Nature, and they show it hanging on my wall and stuff. And then that same guy wrote a terrible. He's the one who accused us of fraud later. It's all very weird. Okay, but everybody was in favor of it at that time. Okay, so then the scientists, then they dated it. They hadn't dated it yet, and it came back that it was much older than the Younger Dryas event. All the pieces and parts were. They all dated back to 37,000 years ago. Which you're like, oh darn, we don't have evidence for our impact, but something happened, and they're all found in Alaska. And y'all seen John Reeves, on Rogan? Yeah, that's where my tusk came from. Right.
The boneyard,
I
or
desperately
something like
tried to get a dialogue with Reeves, and I've had some success. I wanted him to come to the summit. My God, if anybody can get to him, we wanted to take the Comet Research Group plus Randall and go onto Reeves's thing and look for spherules. It's not that hard. And he's out there with this mystery. And it's because as he's documented on Rogan for good reason, he's a private landowner, don't want to bring government, skeptical, or whatever scientists on there. He's a landowner. He's like a farmer or what. They just don't get into that stuff. They got to be somebody you trust to come on and have access to your very, very special place on Earth. Well, damn it, the Comet Research Group, he can trust us. They're both qualified and open-minded, and it comes for free. And
Didn't he have some terrible experience where like the museum in New York took a bunch of his stuff
that
on
happened
loan
too.
and then dumped it in the Hudson or something?
They dumped it off of Manhattan.
It's crazy, yeah. I don't know the details of it, but I've heard him tell that story. He basically loaned them a bunch of his materials. First of all, like for people who don't know about this guy,
it was many decades ago, Shiloh.
Okay, tell the story. I mean, I just want to make sure people who haven't heard his episodes.
Oh, it was so wild. Yeah, I'd be happy to tell it, but you might remember parts better than I do. But I do know that that deposit of Ice Age bones, that bone bed that Reeves owns now, was under different ownership 70, 80 years ago. And it was the chief source of paleo materials for the Natural History Museum in New York. Right? So they had tons and tons and tons of the stuff shipped to New York, if I got it right, on the promise that they would give it back. And that's what Reeves is genuinely pissed about. You're a subsequent landowner. You go look over the agreement and say, hey, that's not yours. That's supposed to go back to me. So to no effect, he demanded it of them. But first of all, they got more than they need, and evidence for that they have more than they could possibly need is at some point they did some rearranging around the museum and took several tons of them and dumped them into the East River. They're a bunch of mammoth bones, right, Anna?
And he didn't he hire some divers to go looking for it or something? And they actually,
yeah. Go ahead.
I don't know the veracity of any of this, but he claims, first of all,
they found the bones or no?
They found them.
There were a bunch of people diving looking for them. It was kind of a thing for a few weeks, and I forget whether I don't think anybody found them.
Oh, I thought he reported that they did find them.
Or did he? Maybe. I'll Google it after the show.
That's crazy.
I mean, the whole story is crazy. This guy's like a gold
New
miner,
York,
right?
Mammoth bones. Yeah.
Like he didn't even mean to be involved in this, from what I understand. He was like a gold miner and discovered all these bones on his plot, basically, and then now he finds himself at the center of like this huge empire.
Geological.
But just to be pedantic, he didn't discover it though. So this is a well-documented bone bed, not modern well-documented, because he's had it in private ownership and all the tools that are available hadn't been.
So he knew about that when he bought the land?
He probably knew there's some bones out back.
But it's crazy. Like he can go out with a fire hose and just spray down hillsides and just get skeleton after skeleton, like anytime he wants, from what I understand. It's just
okay. I got to tell this story. Y'all wrap it up anytime you want, but hold on. I came across one. These are not as uncommon as you might think. Okay, so was in the wetland mitigation business, and that includes stream restoration, which is actually bigger than wetlands. And we were doing 20 miles of stream restoration at a big ranch in Harris County to compensate for the destruction of streams from the new outer loop around Houston called the Grand Parkway. So we had to restore 20 miles of stream. You want one landowner, so we got what is the largest working cattle ranch in Harris County called the Warren Ranch. And Yeah, this Harris County being Houston. So you're in the Houston area, inside the New Loop and whatnot. So we were restoring all these streams. Well, actually, when I first approached, it was owned by a land conservancy, right? But it was operating cattle ranch. So I go and meet with them, and I'm way into all this stuff already, of course. And as I'm coming to get to know the landowner and the conservancy and the land, they said, "We've got a lot of bones." I said, "Well, what kind of bone?" And they said, "Well, they're not fossils." And I'm like, "Really?" Because my thing, I don't, fossils are kind of interesting to me, dinosaur fossils. I mean, somebody gave me one, but I like Ice Age stuff. I'm like, "Really? It's not fossils? Well, when did it come around?" And then, they didn't have the numbers on top of it, but it turned out that they had an Ice Age bone bed at the Warren Ranch. Okay. And I was like, "God, that is crazy." Now, I could have immediately gone into, "Hey, take me out there," and all that kind of stuff going, but I had a pretty big business deal to do. And I didn't want to seem particularly nutty. I said, "Actually, I know a whole lot about that. I'd like to go out there one day if we can get all this done." And a little bit of a long story short, but won't even get it short. So zoom ahead. I'm in the Bahamas at Atlantis or what Atlantis. Um, with my kids, and I'm laying by the pool, and I get a text from one of my guys. This was a couple of years later, and we had begun restoring the streams, which requires heavy yellow iron out there and recontouring them and filling the old stream bed in. And it's a lot of dirt moving. And my man Travis calls me and he goes, "Hey, there's some guys further down the stream that want to borrow our backhoe so they can dig up mammoth bones." And I was like, "No shit." So somebody's out there working on it right now. And I said, called my partner. I said, "Man, I know this seems like a personal thing," because he had followed all my stuff. I said, "But we got to loan some equipment to these people. I can't be on the other side of not assisting a bone bed dig." Okay. And so we, gave them a backhoe several times over the course of a few weeks, and it helped them. They were mostly doing small digging, but if you need one big place gone, you need a big piece of equipment. And it did the job. And then I immediately got back from the Bahamas and flew down there. Immediately said, "I've got to see him do this." And I've got a beautiful set of pictures of all this stuff. So you think, well, this is interesting. You've got an established land conservancy. I'm kind of telling secrets here. I don't give a shit anymore. You got an established land conservancy that is trooping school children out there every day to count wildflowers, understand a working ranch and the natural, all this stuff, which is all great stuff. And then I start getting frustrated. I'm like, "But hold on. Waco, Texas, they found a bone bed, and there's a museum that has, 200,000 visitors a year or whatever. And you build a thing and, you make it a thing. And it happens to be right beside Houston. Think of all those kids that could come out and see something so cool in the county." And I came to understand very quickly that the land conservancy wanted no part.
Hmm.
That was too much attention.
Hmm.
And what happens, and I dearly love the executive director of it, and I'll probably get in trouble with her, but we don't have any ongoing business deals. But I took the other side, and I'm like, "Marianne, you got to be kidding. You can't just cover something like that up." And then it was an enthusiastic amateur paleontologist, oil and gas geologist who found it, who first excavated it. Then the land conservancy quietly brought in Texas A&M, I think it was, and Ernest Lindelius, who's the greatest paleontologist of, Texas history. And Ernie looked at it all and they found a damn bone. They discovered the extent of a species that had never been documented outside of South America. And they're like 7, 10 different species out here. I forget what it is called. It's on a glyptodon or one of those kinds of things. Or a gomathere or something like that. Okay, so they found, I'm like, God, that makes it even more important. This is an important place. And the then it became a thing between the enthusiastic amateur who found it and the lab who did it. And they're still in the we got to keep it a secret until we get to it one day stage. And that's now been 10 years. That was 10 years ago.
Oh, they're basically worried that if they publicize it, people will come and dig the bones up?
Yeah. And there's something to the resentment against. I mean, it got really petty, so petty that I always forget the facts of gossip because it's so bad. I can give you the broad outlines, but I mean, it was just ugly, ugly stuff. And they basically seized the site, kicked out the very competent enthusiastic amateur with geology credentials and stuff, kicked him out of there, cannot have access again, and we'll get to it one day. Because there's always little, land conservancies and a little lefty, and then you get kind of lefty academics, and you don't really want people on the land. And then the lab goes, oh, we got other grants that could be spent. We'd have to go find the money for this. And we'd have to give credit to the guy we just got in a fight with, right? Because they couldn't very well publish it. And so there's been no location, hey, we found this thing from South America in Harris County, little monograph or whatever, So it has been published, but that whole episode, so then it gets you thinking, shit, this stuff, I don't know. I came across a bone bed and I was interested in, it's out there. It's out there. There are lots of remains that we don't see. I've got a Google search for mammoth tusk, and about once every 2 weeks, somebody will find one around the U.S. because they're constantly moving dirt. Now, you don't find bone beds that often. And what did concentrate them right there? Why are they all disarticulated and just jumbled? And it's a totally flat landscape. So you can kind of picture up there in Alaska, a mountainous region, that you'd have some grand catastrophe 37,000. Oh, and then the Comet Research Group tested the tusks, and we'll wrap this stuff up. But they did a paper in 2018. The only 2 times they diverged from the Younger Dryas event was when we did the Sodom thing, and they wrote this paper on the Pleistocene impact or Pleistocene catastrophe in Alaska. And what they did was they didn't get in touch with John. This is how close, why these 2 people need to get together, these 2 groups, but whatever. They went to the Natural History Museum and scooped the sediment out of the tusks, the ones that had been sent to New York, and then put that under the TEM and found out that it was chock a block full with the breath of hell. Right? So then what you want is for them to go to Reeves'
Do you mean like
mine.
more metal pieces?
Yeah,
When you say
more
chock-a-block
spherules,
full-
vaporized,
I see.
vaporized cosmic metals.
That's wild.
Enriched, I forget, was platinum enrichment, but just, but impact proxies.
I mean, I think that there are bones everywhere. I think Shiloh's always going on about this. He's like, what percentage have we dug up? How many archaeological and geological sites do we have relative to the total number that exist? And that's got to be a vanishingly small number.
Well, I know for a fact, not a fact, but I suppose if my construction crew had kept going, and it actually was just beyond we were finishing, 20 miles of stuff, and that was kind of the end of at least that stream channel. Had we been restoring that, they would have gone through there, dug that shit up, tossed it to the side, and if anybody had said, I think we should call it, nah, come on, man, let's go to lunch. I mean, I would think it'd be
you gotta have somebody
unless
there
it was a blatant mammoth tusk, and there are a couple like that. I don't think you could cover. I don't know.
Well, you have to have somebody
that's
there
what argues
who
against
cares.
giants. Everybody's into giants. And all the Smithsonian stole the giants and all that, and it all seems intriguing and whatnot. But by God, there's 100 times the amount of dirt being moved every day in America than there was in the 1800s. And they were finding them, supposedly finding them all over the place. Now, I know they were in mounds, and we're not digging up mounds now, but I would think in all of the dirt moving that is underway in this country at any given moment, if there were 9-foot skeletons or 9-foot tall people out there, we'd have found one of their skeletons in a modern context. The Smithsonian didn't get every last one of them, and none of them exist outside mounds.
I like the idea of there
that's just
being
giants. See, I can be
light.
skeptical on some stuff.
I like the idea that there's a light that goes off in the Smithsonian as soon as one of the giant calls comes in, and they scramble the team, and they just disappear everybody who's involved in the project. And they've
been doing that gig for 120 years. They know exactly what to do.
It's actually the same guy. He's still alive after 120 years as a vampire from the 1300s.
See, I think this principle applies even more strongly to archaeology because humans love living on the coasts. Right, we still all basically, our huge cities are all on the coast for the most part. And so I think about, even all this catastrophism aside, the sea levels were 300 feet different, right?
It's a huge component.
That not that long ago. So it makes sense to me that there would be huge swaths of human history just completely either destroyed by the
Relatively
oceans.
intact. Yeah.
Either way, I
Yeah.
imagine the ocean really wrecks things. But yeah, not necessarily entirely. There actually is a really cool dig going on off the coast of India, off the west coast, is it, of India, with some incredible like pyramid structures and stuff.
Harappan culture or whatever. Yeah.
It is. They think that
But
it's
it would have
probably
been too
related.
deep to have been 5,000 years ago. It would have been, yeah.
I don't know. It's intriguing though, like that there could, but I think that the problem is most archaeologists are not trained divers. Like that's just kind of outside the window of what you're trained in when it comes to archaeology. So there's just got to just be this huge page missing from the history books. I mean, it's just
Well,
on
you gotta
first
be
principle alone.
sympathetic to archaeology, and they'll tell you this in a heartbeat, but it's true, man. There's just not a lot of it going on. When you look at the interest relative to the productive field archaeology, and a lot of it is all siloed and doing shit that people are, there's just not much of it going on in their defense. And then you overlay it's underwater, and then, yeah, you get it. That's why you brought it up. I mean, it's just not going to be, we're not going to find things. But there are things like this pyramid announcement last week. Did you see all the pyramids for a few days on your feeds? That they scanned a new type of synthetic aperture radar, claims to have looked under the pyramids and found 8 columns that reach 2 miles down and all this stuff. Have y'all missed it? Oh,
I mean, no, we've actually been down this rabbit hole, and
what just happened 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, we saw. I
thought
the
it was,
announcements.
Well, what's y'all's opinion? Y'all are.
Well, I mean, it was something kind of interesting.
I mean,
okay, well, here's my experience is a little bit limited. I didn't really like go all the way, but I saw all these images in different, let's say science communicators, places on YouTube, thumbnails, stuff like that. So I went and found the original paper, and it had similar illustrations in it, but nothing with these kind of spring-like columns underneath it. And then we traced on the provenance of those images, and they traced back to this press conference where they were essentially illustrating some sort of, they were actually using the springs as some sort of symbol for some like structural properties of the soil, from what I understand. And
well, I hadn't heard that yet, but Debunking Dan, it was rolled out. You're right. There was the paper, then there's the press release abstract. In the abstract, if my understanding is correct, the abstract is where they have the interpretations, which ran all over the place. Okay. And then, let me get this right. But the hopeful thing is, and I've got the guy, Trevor Grassi, who broke the news and put the abstract out. And like Johanna James had him on her first podcast, and it got like, a huge show. Like she got almost over 1 million views of a long YouTube podcast. And then she did a short on it. It got 12 million. So I'm like, well, Johanna's in touch with him. I got to get this guy to the summit. She's not coming this year because she's in a wedding. And she very kindly put me in touch with Trevor, and he is coming to the summit. So the guy that broke the abstract is going to be on the podcast with me on mine. We are on mine, right? I mean, we are on yours because I've been doing some of this same stuff and kind of forget which way it's going. But and I'm going to do more of it. But he is going to be and he's really excited. And I was like, hey, would you consider coming to this weird conference? He goes, man, I almost came last year. And that guy effectively lives beneath the pyramids. I mean, all he does, he doesn't give a damn about anything that's above ground. He is a pyramid beneath the pyramids of It's a big earth, but you're going to have one person that's willing to go out there and sleep with their head on their backpack to go and crawl in a cave in a dump in Cairo on the edge of the plateau that's filled with dishwashers and actually, junk, and go find new ways in there. And he's found this stuff. I mean, there are lots of places you can start to get into this. A lot of them are shut off and they're not on any maps and all this. And then I went myself in the Osiris shaft in 2020, and it is one of the most profoundly weird things I've ever done in my life. It went 200 feet down on this little rickety ladder, and I put out a video. I'll send it to y'all. I came out and I guess had the wherewithal. I said, okay, I got to do a video. I said, that was scary, man. And you got down there and there's these big diorite granite boxes like they are in the Serapeum and elsewhere, presumably perfect in some respects. Obviously, chips all over them and all that. And then you're like, hell, first of all, why would you put it here? And then you get on the bottom, you see another one. There's one halfway down, and then you get to the bottom, and there's water, and you see this box down there, and you just see that it keeps going. There's a world down there. And no one has systematically gone down and said, okay, let's get some cavers under Giza and go to every place that we know of or is little known. The locals know them all. And they have all sorts of stories about being down there and all sorts. Now, if there is some hall of records or something, I don't think that has been penetrated, but there's a lot more to the subsurface of Giza. And Trevor Grassi is at the leading edge of that. And he was to those researchers as I am to the Younger Dryas group. He's the pajama scientist that was enough of an enthusiast to gain their trust and even do a little publicity for them.
If there's one thing that we're missing right now, it's the reignition of an ancient Egyptian curse to really spice things up by starting to dig around.
Trevor better watch his
I was thinking one thing that would have gone a long way is if they'd showed a scan of a place that wasn't under the pyramids, just for comparison. So I didn't see that in the paper.
My gut says, though, Shiloh, that I don't know if they're onto something. There's a hall of records, but that's pretty sophisticated stuff. And it sounded, was your impression that they were doing kind of groundbreaking stuff? Might not be valid, but they were taking the radar and the micro motions of the Earth, and that you combine those two things. It wasn't just bounced off the top. There was another.
Zoomed in on your face.
Dramatically zoomed
I gotta fix it.
I don't know. I'll have to go deeper into it. I was more just looking.
I'd love to know y'all's. What I'll do is feed you stuff if I get some more good stuff.
I was just trying to validate the headlines with the actual paper source, and I couldn't entirely do it, and that bothered me a lot.
It's to come. What I was going to say earlier. The good news is that Trevor said unequivocally in Johanna's podcast. He said there is a whole lot more coming soon, and he said like a week or 10 days. So any moment now, you could get a lot more from these guys, because it was one of those kind of ham-handed. I don't know. They gave Trevor this abstract, and they didn't expect the world would see it. And he puts it on his Facebook, and it's on the cover of the Daily Mail the next day. So they didn't prepare it, and it was really just to kind of, if I understand right, give a heads up that we got a lot more coming, and that's still to come. So that's a good thing, because in any of these things, you don't want to be like the pyramids off of Cuba, where they see them once and there's seems to be zero hope for whatever reason, Cuban government or whatever. And this thing, of course, the Egyptians can't lock them out of there. So it's not like somebody went and managed to drag one GPR across, they found something, and now they won't let them back. That this should be an ongoing thing that is either provable or disprovable or whatever. We'll be able to be more skeptical or less skeptical as it progresses, which isn't true with every crazy subject.
Is there any chance you could talk to those authors themselves? Who is it, like Biondi or something like that? And I forget the other person.
I asked Trevor, and the problem is the Italians do not speak English. But
they're publishing.
Have a translator, and they're like the Younger Dryas team. I think. I don't know, but it's like they're kind of busy right now, and they've got their research, and then maybe they don't feel it's totally ready. It could be one of the, remember Cesar Paez? Y'all have had him on. Is that what you say? That I remember. Salvador Paez. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That for years, if you're kind of following those patents, it's like, his man of mystery. Will he ever be revealed? And then when he comes out, it's like he's the most regular guy, will tell you damn near anything. He's on there, he's great. I gotta get it. I'd love him to come to Summit, be featured guest, as we're calling people that aren't speakers. But this could be like that, where those guys are just quiet until they really want to start going on stuff, and they'll go on Italian podcasts, and we'll see see it translated or something. I think it has the hope to get more clear literally. And
Yeah, I think over time more data will come out, and there's going to be a lot more that we can say with certainty about it. It's certainly interesting. I think it's within the realm of possibility that there's crazy things underneath the pyramids.
I think the technology is within the realm of possibility, because I feel pretty certain that the U.S. government knows how to at
Look at
least look down 100 meters or something, because they're so important to know where those bunkers are. I
sure.
mean, one of the most important questions in the world is, how are the Iranians securing that stuff? The nuclear weapon, nuclear stuff, right?
Mm.
And that's why they have those bunker buster bombs that are the only thing short of a nuclear bomb to blow those up. So there's a lot of attention on subsurface technologies, I would imagine. I would
Future is
imagine it's
underground.
classified. And I would also imagine that other researchers could stumble on to whatever the government. See, this is total speculation, but this is what's in my head. That it doesn't seem beyond the ken of man to look beneath the earth, that we probably have figured it out, and that other researchers that aren't part of the program pieced it together and said, okay, here's a good way to do it. We've got a new approach, when it's actually something that's been, that's been pointed
I
at
mean, I encourage
Iran
everybody
for
to go
some
and look
time.
at that paper. It's freely available, and you can see the original scans, and then you can make up your own mind about whether you think it
But
represents, structural elements or not.
but
I
the
mean,
abstract wasn't using those. It was using the newer data, was at least what I thought. Right?
But
That paper is not a good thing. What Trevor was saying, it helps you understand the technology and stuff, but it's not really an insight into what they're seeing right now,
mm,
even though it did have chambers and things like that. But I don't know. I don't know. It's a work in progress, and I'll send Trevor Grassi your way if you want to talk to him.
sure.
yeah, let's
Okay.
talk.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, I mean, I think that the world is big and strange, and there's a tremendous amount of stuff that isn't settled and isn't discovered yet. And you and I were talking a little bit about the idea of the loom of ideas,
Hmm.
and the fact that there's all these different threads that get woven together into the fabric of our time, and everybody's got a slightly different design for that fabric, but
That's right.
it's happening.
And I think the weaving used to occur very slowly. It's always going on, idea exchange and iterations and moving through things, hopefully closer to the truth. But I think it's accelerated, and I think it's because of podcasting. And I think that this mundane thing, that's not even that, it's just a function of bandwidth, right? And I guess uh, small cameras and stuff, but that it's just much more profoundly important than is generally appreciated in all sorts of domains, from politics to Joe Rogan. I mean, you could arguably say that the president of the United States, it changed the course of this election. But with science, I think it's just a pair that podcasts are going to destroy paradigms, because we're weaving together all these things. And what happens is, you go on your show, and then somebody else watches it and on their show. And then the percolation of the good ideas amongst the non-credentialed and some of the credentialed too, the percolation is accelerated beyond what it's ever been. And that, I'm going to zoom myself in again if I'm waving my arms around it. Okay. Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right.
And
I think it plays an actual legitimate role that history will recognize.
yeah,
Just that, especially if you look at the kind of capture and decay of the institutional publishing landscape, I think that
yeah,
there's natural. I think, like, look, I think
yeah,
humans adapt, right? And this is part of the adaptation to an ecosystem intellectually that's sort of suffocating and unproductive. It's like people
that's right.
are curious, they're gonna solve problems, and whether they use the institutions or create new institutions,
One way
they're
or
gonna
another,
keep
they're going to get
working.
there. And that's one of y'all's philosophies.
That's right.
And that's right. And I think that this is part of that, from kind of an unexpected, kind of seemingly mundane, silly thing, podcasts, well, less and less so. But there's something about the way that that's why I call it, weaving and stuff. The I don't know, the fabric tightens up really quickly. We'll get back to paradigm busting. You can't, this vase, this whole vase thing, you aren't ever going to put that away. There's no, I mean, it's a great subject. And if it wasn't for podcasts, it just wouldn't be there. there'd be some scientific paper, maybe, if somebody managed to get it published, or one book. And now, boom, there are a couple million people a week learning anew about the vases. Then other people get interested to solve it. See, that's what happened with Matt Bell. Matt Bell saw what Adam was doing and happened to be a very well-resourced individual. And then that turns that light on, and that light has resources, and you're able to circumvent what was the percolation through peer review, which has been, I think everybody agreed has its flaws, and it certainly doesn't work quickly, and it can work against itself. And I don't think podcasts do any of that. I don't think there's any way to damn stop it,
What's crazy, we were just talking with Matt the other day, and what's crazy is he's kind of like, yeah, I mean, there's no way really to know, like, this question will never, ever be solved, essentially, because there's no way to really guarantee where this particular artifact came from. We just don't know. Like, the really highly precise ones, they appeared in the 80s or something. There's no way you'll ever get to the bottom of that. So it's forever, in some sense, a mystery and a thorn to people who want to put certainty
what Adam
in this
Young
story.
is doing, though, is getting those with provenance, right? Like, they got the Petrie Museum was the first one. And
but even that, right, it still just goes back to the 1800s or something. Like, people will argue endlessly about whether it's reliable provenance, and then add to the fact that it does seem like people could fake it if they wanted to. The question is whether they have or not faked it. Like, even Matt, we were like, Matt, like, is it possible that these things were produced later? Like, and he was like, well, yeah, it's definitely possible. Like, which is an interesting perspective, because I think that a lot of times people talking about these vases want to say that it's impossible precision and stuff, but Matt was kind of like, no, it's possible. He was just like, I don't know that the question is whether or not it's possible. It's whether or not somebody would really go out of their way to do that. Like, it would cost a tremendous amount of money.
That's right. And why would you live in a mud brick home and have bone tools if you also had the wherewithal to take a solid piece of granite and turn it into this? I mean, there's something, I mean, yeah, you're not going to prove anything, but what you can do is say, you need to prove to me, mainstream skeptic, how they do it. I don't care when, I don't really care who, but show me a way, I guess you do care who, and you do care that it's pre-dynastic, somewhat. But show me, explain to me why they would put as much energy into these, just as you just said. Why would they divert the incredible amount of resources it would take to do this?
Most people are saying that they didn't, that they're made in modern era. I guess that's what I was pointing to. Is that
Jesus Christ, I mean, just throw out everything. Just so who knows? We're not sure that maybe the pyramids were built in 1650. I mean, no, Herodotus said they're there, but damn it, you can't. There's plenty of stuff out there that has equally good provenance, that the mainstream, or equally bad provenance, that the mainstream accepts. So this is an outlier where you're like, okay, you're never going to be able to say. And I don't agree with you. There are vases that were found in Nakata graves that, and this archaeologist found them. Now, did somebody
only know that they were found there because the archaeologist told you that, right?
Oh yeah, it could
be
I
remember I'm not an expert on this, but I asked Matt about it, and he said that the precise ones had pretty recent provenance. That's all that. Do you remember him saying that? Yeah, I think that's what he said. He would know better than me. I have no dog in this fight whatsoever.
Well, see, I think you can get to the bottom of that. I think you're maybe being too cynical about it, because you could go, for instance, take their 30,000 or some, unbelievable number of fragments and intact vessels to some degree underneath Saqqara today. The Snake brothers have walked around and filmed it, right? So you could take one of those, even if it was a sherd or a collection of them, and say, well, is this a perfect whatever? How thin is this? Does it exhibit, at least in this little piece, that? And damn it, that's down there today, unless somebody made one modern, broke it, and hid it in a niche under the pyramid. So it's just a matter of time, money, access, And that's moving along pretty well. I think there's some talk that some of the, that they might play ball in Egypt, right?
Yeah, I mean,
And,
Ben's been doing really interesting work on this. We had him on the show to talk about it, thanks to you,
Yeah.
actually. So thank you for that connection.
Oh, no, thank you. No, I was glad to see it. That's what I said. We did a little weaving, right? That's the behind the scenes
did the
weaving.
weaving,
where
yeah. You were
send a
definitely
little-
the weaver. You were absolutely the weaver.
Yeah.
I think, look, I think that the position that Shiloh and I maintain as collectors of theories, there's something to add to Howard's law, is that you are entitled to a multitude of crazy theories as long as you do not insist that they are all correct. If you can contain within your mind a multitude of wild ideas and not marry yourself to any of them to say that every single one of these crazy ideas is true.
Yeah, well, that's the Shiloh corollary to the Howard rule.
100%. Yeah, I just try not to buy. I mean, I want to believe a lot of this stuff. Don't get me wrong. Like, it's really exciting to me if there are vast structures under the pyramids, or if these impossibly precise vases truly do originate from the pre-diagnostic period. Like, that's what I want to be true, but I just got to be careful because I want it so badly. Like, I need to.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I gotta protect myself against myself, basically.
Yeah,
that's
right.
Right? Like, it's really easy to fool yourself. It's really easy to become convinced of something that has issues with it. And you see that the history of science and the history of archaeology and everything else is littered with people having made this mistake. So we know that this is the way that minds fail.
But I think collectively we get there.
I don't know. I mean, you look at the mainstream right now, and I'm like, the collective.
One way or another, collectively we approach the truth over time.
Certainly keep searching.
I
yeah.
don't know. This opens
I got a good
take
huge for you, and this helps me pimp the summit a little bit too. But it occurred to me the other day: if one speaker is right, just one, got 27, 40 hours of content. If one of them's right, then a hell of a lot of people are wrong.
Yeah,
it could be Matt with the vases. It could be Danny Hillman with Gadam Gadang. It could be Robert Edward Grant speaking of sacred geometry. It could be Praveen and the Indian temples. If Ben's right about the vases, these are vastly different subjects. If Hugh Newman is correct about his interpretation of Turkey, if Antonio's right about the Carolina Bays, just one of them has to be right, and it should be absolute globe-shaking news. But okay, so maybe the skeptics, they're fair to say that's just a take. Maybe they're all flat fucking wrong.
I don't think that it's that they're all flat fucking wrong. It's that I think it's really, really important to hang on to the thing that we're doing here, which is we're telling stories. We're telling stories that weave the evidence together in the best way possible. And that is, we attempt to tell the best story that we can, given the knowledge that we have available to us. As the knowledge that is available to us changes, expands, shifts, grows, is recast into a different light, the story that we tell will be different. And we have to fight against becoming dogmatic in the same way that the positions we contradict are dogmatic. Like, dogma does not have space here because you don't want to replace one dogma with another. And that's the key. Because if you do that, then 100 years from now, people will be saying the exact same thing about the ideas.
And that's our personal responsibility, such that our is a thing, whatever. That people who are in our space, I mean, that's the importance of it. Now, and of course, there are going to be some nutty podcasts, but I think the good ones are the ones where you trust that person knows that. Those are the best ones where you it's no fun to listen to those ones where everything is legit. It's like Alex Jones. It's just too much. It can't all be true. Right?
Maybe
he seems to believe every one of it. I find it more interesting if someone comes on and says, okay, here's what Alex Jones said today, and it sounds wild. He started the pyramids thing. Right? And of course, he came on and said, it's all changed. It's over now. We know that there's shit under the pyramids and all that. He ain't doing what Anna and Shiloh are doing, where you take it, publicize it, talk it into the ground, but you don't come in with a dogmatic certainty that you've just won some great intellectual prize. You were always right, or everybody else is wrong. Exactly what you're talking about. So it's
Dogma
a responsibility.
Much more popular. Dogma is much more popular. Alex Jones going on and saying that everything was a lie and this is the new truth. Like, there's more eyes on it. I think it's tastier for people, but like people prefer Fritos to like, I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
to just even a piece of steak. Like I
Rice
think that
cakes.
right? Or not even to rice cakes. Like I think it's more this attitude of there's things that are engineered to get at your brainstem. And
Yeah.
if you put somebody down in front of Fritos or just like a steak, I
Mhm.
think that there's plenty of
Mhm.
people that will choose the Fritos because they have a
Mhm.
more vibrant sensory experience of like the
Mhm.
crunch and the salt and the spice and everything else. And the steak is just like, I don't know, it's just meat.
Yeah,
But
it's engineered.
it's engineered. And
It
I think that that's the thing
yeah.
that really gets at people where it's like the dogma's tasty. And the dogma is
Mhm.
tasty if it's telling you that the Younger Dryas never happened. The dogma is tasty if it's telling you that the Younger Dryas 100% was caused by like a huge impact event. The dogma is
Mhm.
tasty if it's telling you that 100% there's shit underneath the pyramids. And I'm like,
Mhm.
it's tasty. It's
Y'all are
always
good
it's
math
always going to
people.
be popular. It's always going to be tasty. And bless them.
When
Yeah.
is Cosmic Summit going down this year?
The solstice, the longest day of the year and the first day of summer, June 20th through 23rd.
Very cool.
And
So
it's going
everybody
to be
can
the
do a
same
double
location.
header. They
Yeah,
can
that means
come.
everybody can go to
Well,
both
it's right after
conferences.
Portugal,
It
right?
is
Hell
right
yeah.
after Portugal.
Right, or I would go. And
I
good
totally
on y'all.
understand.
Okay, yeah. I've got a friend that really wants to go to Portugal too, but we can't do that yet. And there are a couple of conferences around that time. I've never been to the ones out in California and stuff that are kind of similar just because they're always right before. But okay, so it's June 20th, 23rd, and it has some similar things and some different things. And so you've got speakers on first we're going to have a field trip. It appears we're going to go to Pilot Mountain on the solstice, and it casts a perfect shadow east, west, yeah, east. And so we're going to do some fun stuff like that. We've got, and then you have 2 days of speakers. So all the people that you'd see on the website and this list would speak. But then you also have featured guests, right? Where we're bringing in, we don't have enough time for them to speak, but damn, you got to know this person's in the audience. Get this, so and so, like Big Head Todd. I don't know if you remember that band. Y'all aren't old enough, but just doesn't even ring a. Well, it seems like he signed on the other day. So there are other better examples, but so we got speakers, and then we have fine-tuned the third day, which is a separate ticket, and that's a deep dive classroom day. And we didn't do it as well as we could have, but it was popular last year. And that's where there are 3 breakouts in the morning, 3 breakouts in the afternoon. And even though Yusuf Awan and Ben both separately spoke on Egypt for their slots, they go in for 3 hours, sit and really get into it with the folks. So Randall maybe he does catastrophic geology, but on the classroom day, he's doing sacred geometry and he's bringing his tools and everybody gets a tool. And we're having a younger Dryas, like just PhDs and me that have been on the papers, and Templars for the people who into that part. And actually, it does fit all this stuff. They were all about Atlantis. That blows my mind that both my grandfathers, like so many people, were both Masons. And people think I'm weird because I'm into the pyramids. Well, my grandfathers are both the kind of guys with oil paintings and pipes and all that kind of stuff, with suits and shit. Well, what were they doing on Friday night with the boys? Doing this shit. Doing really weird pyramid ceremonies. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it or anything dark about it, but eh, that's weird. I haven't joined a club where you go and reenact ancient ceremonies of these people, and that's what they thought they were doing, that it was the lost wisdom of Atlantis is being protected by their sect. And within 2 miles of me, there are 2 giant things, or 2 big temples in Raleigh, one of which was the Secretary of War in the World War II, whatever, Josephus Daniels' house, that are Templar headquarters. Those were places to study Atlantis. So this ain't nothing new under the sun. It just kind of changes form. That made me feel really good when I thought about that, because sometimes I feel kind of weird into the stuff. I'm like, granddads, they were both, you know.
It sounds like a
Okay.
really fun conference, honestly.
It
I
really
wish
does.
we
That's
could
the
go.
Templars.
My
I'm
little
not
cousin's
missing.
getting married though, so we're gonna have to skip it as well. Otherwise, I'd
Well,
rush back
listen,
for
I mean,
that.
I think I've asked y'all in the past, and to reconfirm, I'd like y'all to, first of all, you can pop up anytime. If you got a friend that wants to come, let me know. And I'd like to kind of have y'all in the Cosmic Summit family. It's not directly related, but so I'd like to use your logo and say that this is media
Let's make it
partners.
happen next year for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah.
We'll try very hard to
Well,
not schedule
are
our
y'all
own
going to
event
do
over
it maybe again in Portugal? You got to see how it goes.
Oh, we won't do it in Portugal. We were in Austin last year for our first conference.
Right.
I don't know
I
where
was
we'll be the
wondering
next year.
Why did you go overseas? It's such a hard thing to do in the first place.
Yeah, well, maybe it wasn't the best idea, but maybe it's pretty cool. I mean,
It sounds
first
like
of
you're
all,
doing well with it, right?
I mean, it's a beautiful spot. Part of the reason was that a lot of the people working on these subjects aren't in the United States.
And half
So-
our audience is in Europe.
Yeah, we have like half our audience in Europe, and half of our scientists involved in this question are spread throughout the other part of the world. So it made sense. It has made it a bit more expensive for people, but I think it'll result in a really intimate gathering as well at the same time. And I don't know, we needed an excuse to go to Europe anyways. So
That's awesome, man. Y'all are great. And hey, did you ever pick a new? Well, obviously not. But are you still going to pick a new name for the podcast? Y'all talked about
the
that one.
further we get into this, the more stuck with it we are, right?
That's right. But I put some significant time. I usually can think of good names, so I took it on as a child. Like I can think of a good name, and I hadn't hit one yet. I was just
Every
trying
once in a while
to
we'll hit
summarize,
something,
y'all.
but-
You're hard to summarize.
Yeah.
You don't, in 2 or 3 words, give them some feel. And you don't want something generic. I don't like that. Like summit, like cosmic doesn't mean, well, space, and you're going to get together. I don't know.
I think that Shiloh always points out, he's like, Pink Floyd doesn't make any sense as a name. And yet everybody says Pink Floyd and nobody thinks twice.
I have a theory that it just doesn't freaking matter at all. Like, if you're good at what you do, people call you whatever the heck you want. So, I don't know.
That's right, man.
I try not to get too hung up on it.
Interesting. Well, stay at it. And I appreciate y'all having me again.
Heck
It was
yeah.
really wonderful.
I really do. Because I've kind of lost my lane. I used to go on podcasts because I was like the pajama scientist, Younger Dryas guy. And now I've become like a promotion guy. People think I'm the guy that holds the Cosmic Summit. But, nobody wants that guy on your podcast. What, he's going to come try to sell tickets on my podcast? So I don't get any more invites and stuff because they don't want me coming and pimping the show. But as y'all recognize, thank you very much. I kind of had a gig in this whole world before I took on having a big party, and it's good to talk about that stuff instead of, and I'm sure people appreciate it instead of just talking about the summit, trying to sell tickets. But if you do want tickets, we have 5 ticket types available. All the way from day passes to no food to make it very affordable. Hotel rooms at the beautiful Sheraton Four Seasons Greensboro are $179 a night. And then just plead with you that if you're interested in coming, please buy it now so I can sleep. That, as y'all know,
I know the feeling. Yeah, I'm going to echo that one.
I've always said one of my great fears, whenever I got up was having parties and nobody come. But I've done enough entertaining, so whatever, I felt that a whole lot in my life, and you regret. And I don't like deadlines, hate deadlines, hate people not showing up at a party. So what do I do in my retirement but come up with a yearly thing that enough people might not show up to, and you lose money. It's even worse than a damn party, like a regular cocktail party. At least, I guess it's
At least there's only one platter of canapes to put into the trash if nobody shows up to your cocktail party. Here it seems like
instead of having to buy back 120 hotel rooms from a
yeah, no, it's a real crazy
years.
thing.
Oh God. But I think this year it should work out. So, but please buy tickets now. And
I hope people do. And they can go to both conferences.
Yeah, doubleheader
if
at
you're
Beyond the
feeling
Big Bang in
adventurous.
Portugal, and then afterwards Cosmic Summit in Greensboro, North Carolina. That'd be
that's
a hell
right.
of a
Do
jam.
y'all live stream? Are you going to sell access? I hope you're above that. I'm not.
We're figuring it out.
Yeah,
We're definitely going to record stuff, but
yeah.
we'll see whether we stream it or not this year. We did the first year. It was cool.
Well, there might be, and in the future when you do things, that just occurred to me. We could have loaned you our conference software. We got very expensive, like fully fledged point of sale, all of that stuff, Cvents, biggest management company. And what I'm saying is we need to use up, we bought too much and I'd rather go with someone else now. So I would give away, and if anybody's listening, if it's something good, I would give away an event to somebody just to accelerate my exit from the contract because we'd like to try something else out. But it is a good service. It's almost too high end, actually.
All right, maybe we can correspond about that.
It prints out beautiful badges, all of that. Now you would have to pay for that, but just the selling the tickets, we could talk about that sometime.
I see. Yeah, we're good on that for this year, but
yeah,
I don't know, man.
It's I know what you're going. Thank you very much.
Yeah, dude, it's always fun to talk to you. Honestly,
thank you very much.
I like the way your mind works.
Good special friends, and just keep at it. We're approaching the truth, even if it's halfway to the wall each time, and we never get there. Right?
It is all about the spirit of the pursuit.
Indeed.
All right, thank you, George.
Fantastic.
We'll let you go, man. And
thank you very
keep
much.
at it. Keep at it. I hope everybody gets a chance to go to both these conferences.
Indeed.
Yeah. They're great people who come to these things, as you might have noticed when you had last.
That's the best
we
part.
look forward to seeing them too.
Indeed.
Absolutely. All right, peace. Bye, everybody.